Hello, and welcome to this clean, historical Western romance by Martha Gillcrest. It's great to have you with us. Before we begin, be sure to hit the subscribe button, give this audiobook a thumbs up, and share it with friends. Supporting us in this simple way allows us to share more heartwarming romance stories with you for free. Now, get cozy, relax, and escape into adventure and love with a host of new characters. Enjoy. The following book is the copyright of Martha Gillcrest. The Bride's Escape, Book 3 of the Widows of Willow Brook Trilogy by Martha Gillcrest. Chapter 1. Willow Brook, Montana, 1879. It's time to move on with your life now, Eleanor. You can't live on memories alone, and those sweet children of yours deserve to have another pa, just like you deserve to find love again. Eleanor Brent sighed to herself as she thought about what her sister had said to her the previous day. It was easy for Imogen to believe in second chances, though. She had gotten lucky with her second marriage. What troubled Eleanor, now that she was a widow, was that she was afraid she might never have the same good fortune. Jacob had been her childhood sweetheart, and she had adored him during their marriage. Did love like that ever happen twice in one lifetime? She doubted it. "Tell us more about Pa," Lily said as they walked along the dusty track that led to the river. Her hair fell in tousled curls over her shoulders, and every so often she hummed to herself and skipped a few steps, absorbed in everything around them with the natural curiosity of an inquisitive child. Wildflowers nodded in the meadow grass, which would soon be scythed and dried to make hay to feed the cattle in winter. Two red-tailed hawks glided effortlessly in wide circles in the blue sky above them, and Eleanor paused for a moment to follow their progress. It seemed somehow fitting that the magnificent birds who paired for life would accompany them on the second anniversary of her husband's death. "Yes, please, Ma," Isaac chimed in. His eyes clouded momentarily in an expression that was too old for the face of a 6-year-old boy and made Eleanor's heart squeeze with pity. His shoulders drooped, and he blinked rapidly, not wanting to cry. "Sometimes I find it hard to remember what he looked like," he added quietly. Eleanor put her arms around her twin children and bent down slightly so she could hold their attention. "Your pa was a wonderful man, and although he's no longer with us in person, he will always live on in our hearts." She smiled and ruffled their identical sandy-colored hair. "Anytime you can't remember him, just look in the mirror. There's a lot of him in you, especially that dimple in your chin." The children grinned at each other, looking like two peas in a pod, and walked on again more happily. "And we can pray about him every night, Isaac, just like the pastor told us to," Lily said, nodding her head firmly. "It's almost like speaking to him, even if he's not with us to hear it. I like to tell Pa all about what I've been doing each day just before I go to sleep." "Me too," Isaac exclaimed. He kicked a pebble along the track for a few steps, sending up small puffs of dust. "Tonight, I'm going to tell him about the wooden soldiers that Mervyn whittled for me." Lily did a twirl, letting her hands brush through the long grass. "I'm going to tell him about the summer fair in Willow Brook tomorrow. It's so exciting. I can hardly wait. Aunt Imogen said there will be a band playing, and Uncle Jeff said we can watch the horse racing from the back of the wagon so we can see over everyone's heads. I bet Frank will ride faster than all the visitors. He's been showing us his horse tricks, Ma. Maybe when I'm older, I can do rodeo riding." Eleanor's heart was full of bittersweet emotions as her children skipped ahead toward the river. 2 years had passed since her husband Jacob had been killed in the Pittsburgh Railroad riots. A stray bullet had changed their lives in an instant. He'd been caught in the crossfire when soldiers were brought in to try and regain control over the eruption of lawlessness and marauding protesters who were demanding better pay and conditions from their employers. 2 years since the comfort of being held in my husband's arms. And 2 years that dear Isaac and Lily have had to manage without the love of a good father in their lives. The thoughts took her breath away as grief suddenly swept over her again. In some ways, it felt like a lifetime ago that she had lost Jacob, but in other ways, it felt like only yesterday. "Is this the best place, Ma?" Isaac asked as they approached the riverbank. "Yes, this will do nicely." Eleanor pushed her sadness away and took a deep breath. "I think your pa would have liked it here." If she closed her eyes, she could almost imagine him standing next to them, with his brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled and the way his palms were calloused from hauling luggage on and off the trains as part of his role as a conductor. "Stay in the present," she told herself, hastily looking around at their surroundings. She needed to remember the good times, not get sucked back into the raw pain of losing him on that fateful day when fires had raged across Pittsburgh and the air had been filled with angry shouting. He'd never even intended to take part in the riots. "Do you think somehow Pa knows that the bend of the river just yonder is where we like to go fishing?" Isaac sounded doubtful. "Of course," Lily scoffed. "Sometimes I even think I can hear him whispering that we're doing a great job," she added. Her chin lifted defiantly. "Billy Fenton said it was nonsense at Sunday school. He told me it was just the wind blowing through the trees. But what does he know?" Eleanor smiled inwardly. Lily was a high-spirited girl. It would take more than a remark like Billy's to stop her from believing that God's mysterious ways allowed Jacob to be present for his children, whether through a star shining more brightly than usual or a white feather drifting to the ground in front of them when there were no birds around. As the children enjoyed a few minutes exploring the riverbank, Eleanor allowed her thoughts to roam and her memories of the last 2 years to meander through her mind. Looking around, she drank in the view. They had reached her favorite spot at High Bluff Ranch. The river wound sinuously through the meadow, glittering in the summer sun, and the willow trees growing on the bank provided dappled shade. "How lucky that fate brought us here," she mused. It had all started over a year ago when her sister Imogen had replied to an advertisement in the Matrimonial Times placed by Jeff Hayden. After a short correspondence, Jeff had proposed and sent the train fare money, and Imogen had persuaded Eleanor to come too, saying that it was surely better than remaining in Pittsburgh with nothing but sad memories left there for her. And so it was that she had packed up all their belongings and they had headed west to Montana, along with their friend Fiona. Since then, Fiona had gotten married to Abraham Radcliffe, a kind-hearted man in town with a passion for baking, and together they ran Betty's Bakehouse in Willow Brook. Then, a year ago, Imogen and Jeff had wed and now lived in the main homestead of High Bluff Ranch, which Jeff's parents had built. Imogen had been blessed to bear a child as well, which had filled Eleanor with joy. Baby Jesse was a delight with his tufty hair and gummy smile, a cousin for Isaac and Lily, and doted on by all the old ladies of Willow Brook when Jeff was in town carrying out his duties as the mayor. Looking back, Eleanor was glad that Imogen had encouraged her to bring the children to Montana. The wide-open spaces and friendly folks in Willow Brook, their nearest town, were a wonderful antidote to the crowded streets of Pittsburgh. Jeff had proved to be a kind-hearted brother-in-law to her as well. He insisted that Eleanor and the children should live in the small log cabin just across the barnyard from the main homestead for as long as she wanted. She was grateful for the time and space this had given her to grieve her losses without worrying about how she could pay the rent, which would have soon seen her penniless back east, thanks to the railroad company's refusal to pay compensation for Jacob's tragic death. Not only that, the beauty of the rolling hills and distant mountains of Willow Brook and the ranch, plus having Imogen nearby, had done a lot to heal their hearts. Mervyn and Frank, the 2 ranch hands, loved to teach the children how to care for the farm animals and had patiently taught them all to horseback ride. And Jeff's ma, Jillian, enjoyed nothing more than reading them stories and letting them help her collect the eggs, still warm, from the coop. "Howdy, Eleanor." As if summoned by her thoughts, Mervyn's greeting rang out across the fields as he rode across the hill on the other side of the river. They all knew the anniversary of Jacob's passing was a poignant day for her, and he tipped his hat respectfully before waving at the children. "Don't forget to come and help me feed the new calf tonight if you're up to it." Her heart lifted, and she was grateful for his kindness. Helping him with the barn chores would be perfect for taking the children's minds off feeling sad. As Mervyn's horse disappeared over the top of the hill, birds swooped and dipped over the river, and every now and again there was a silvery splash as a fish jumped to catch a fly. Eleanor had spent many an evening beneath the willow trees, letting the beauty and tranquility of the place wash over her. Being widowed with 2 young children had been hard, but being near the water healed her. Plus, it was difficult to stay sad being surrounded by the beauty of God's creation. Over the last year, they had witnessed the turning of the seasons in a way that had been less noticeable in Pittsburgh. Fall had brought the flame-colored leaves to the woods that cloaked the mountains. Then icicles adorned the river's edge during the biting winter months. And lately, Eleanor's breath had been taken away by the magnificent pink and orange sunsets over the ranch as the sky faded to inky blue and moths batted against the lamp on the porch when she sat outside in the soft evening air. Perhaps Imogen's right, and it's time to start looking to the future again. The thought crept into her mind unexpectedly, and she turned it over in her mind, rather than dismissing it instantly. Before she could ponder it anymore, the children's chatter brought her back to the present and what they had come to do. "What shall we say to remember him, Ma?" Lily asked. "Will it make us sad?" Isaac sounded worried again. Eleanor looked down at them, taking pleasure in how their sandy-colored hair and brown eyes reminded her of Jacob, and always would. "We'll throw the flowers into the river, and then I'll say a prayer. I think that would be a nice way to remember Pa." Eleanor handed the children a small posy of flowers each, which they had picked from the homestead garden. There were white roses for love, lilies for peace, and lavender for serenity. "Ready?" The children nodded solemnly. "Dear Lord, we come here today to remember Jacob and hold him in our hearts. We give thanks for how hard he worked on the railroads to give us a good life, and we pray that he rests in everlasting peace. Just as Jesus died to save us, our hearts rejoice in knowing that he lives on in us, and we pray that we may serve you, O God, in your glory." As they scattered the flowers on the river, the blooms danced on the surface of the water before the swirling currents carried them away downriver, and Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the deep ache of loss, followed by a sense of peace. "Can we spend the coins Uncle Jeff gave us at the summer fair tomorrow?" Isaac asked a moment later. "Mervyn told us there might be candy." "And gingerbread. That's what Mr. Radcliffe is selling on his stall," Lily said, clapping her hands. "I think that would be a grand idea." Eleanor's spirits lifted as they started walking back toward the homestead, and she was pleased that the children were eager to enjoy the summer fair instead of dwelling on the past. "Maybe I could learn to do the same," she muttered. A wry smile tugged at her mouth. There it was again, another nudge to leave the past behind. Clearly, Imogen's suggestions were rubbing off on her. Speaking of her sister, she could see Imogen draping wet sheets on the washing line and Frank working a young colt in the corral. It was a peaceful scene, but something deep in her heart was starting to feel restless. "Maybe it's time for something different," she murmured to herself. Along with Imogen's hints, the idea had been tugging at the edge of her mind for a while. But it was only now that she had passed the 2nd anniversary of Jacob's passing that it was starting to feel more insistent, demanding her attention. It was time to take stock of her life and look to the future. Jacob had moved on to the next life, but she owed it to him to be happy and raise the children well. And for the first time in 2 years, she allowed herself to wonder whether that future might include leaving the comforting surroundings of High Bluff Ranch and marrying again. After all, as Imogen was always telling her, life was for living, and there were plenty of men out west who would be delighted to marry a widow with 2 sunny-natured children. Chapter 2. Eleanor swirled her paintbrush in a jar of water, and then picked up some paint on the sable bristles from her palette and carefully applied it to the canvas in front of her. With each stroke of the brush, the painting came to life a little bit more. All she needed to add now was the last few touches to the trees in the foreground, and the painting would be complete. A few minutes later, she stood back from her easel and absent-mindedly wiped her hands on her apron. Even to her critical eye, she could tell that her painting had improved since leaving Pittsburgh. "Have you finished? Can I have a look at it?" Imogen bustled across the barnyard with Jessie in her arms to where Eleanor had set up her easel at the edge of the garden. It was a spot that gave a clear view across the ranch toward the distant mountains, and Eleanor often worked there under the shade of the apple trees. Another hour, and I should be done. I just need to put some shadowing under the trees, so remember it's not quite finished. Look at your aunt's painting, Jessie, Imogen cooed as she shifted the baby higher. Isn't it wonderful? Eleanor felt the usual moment of awkwardness, which always accompanied someone looking at her art, even when it was Imogen. There was something about revealing her creativity to others, and how it left her open to judgment and possibly well-meaning criticism that always left her feeling slightly nervous. Oh, Eleanor, I think this is your best one yet. Imogen walked closer to the canvas and then took several steps backward again, tipping her head slightly to one side as she eyed the hues of soft green and blue, which perfectly captured the mountains and tumbling river, right down to the russet-coated cattle grazing in the distant pastures. I painted this scene in fall and winter. This is supposed to show how it changes in summer, Eleanor murmured, wiping the excess water off her brush on a piece of cotton rag. I don't know how you do it, Imogen said, shaking her head in wonder. It's more than just the likeness of the scene. I feel as though I could be sitting on the veranda and practically able to hear the birds overhead just by looking at this picture. Eleanor blushed. It's very kind of you to say so. As for it being my best one yet, I think for once I agree. She held up her hands modestly. But it's not through any particular talent of mine. It's because the views here are so spectacular. I couldn't stop painting them, even if I wanted to. It's like the Lord is trying to get me to capture every moment of this beautiful landscape, to record it for His glory. That's a nice way of putting it. Imogen smoothed her hand over Jessie's downy hair. But I don't necessarily think that's all there is to it, she added with a wry smile. You certainly do have a talent for painting, even though you're too modest to admit it. The sound of a horse and wagon rumbling up the track caught their attention, and Imogen's face shone with happiness as they saw it was Jeff returning from Willow Brook. He had been busy in town these last few days, helping everyone get ready for the town's second summer fair. The first one had been Jeff's idea when he had first gotten the position of mayor the year before, as a way of promoting Willow Brook in the surrounding district and beyond. It had been a roaring success, and this year he was determined to make it even bigger and better. Do you want me to take care of unhitching Marty, boss? Frank had just finished mending the barn shingles and clambered back down his ladder. Uh-huh. Thanks, Frank. You're doing a good job of that, by the way. Are the horses all ready for tomorrow? Reckon that new gelding of yours is in with a chance of winning? I sure hope so. Frank grabbed the reins and started unhitching Jeff's horse while Isaac and Lily pumped some water into a bucket for him. How's my boy? Jeff asked as he came to greet Imogen. He lifted Jessie carefully out of her arms and broke into a proud smile as Jessie gurgled and kicked his legs excitedly. I reckon he's grown since just last week. Look at how strong his legs are. He's pleased to see his pa, and so am I. You've been working too hard lately, and we miss you. Imogen tilted her face upward so that he could brush a kiss on her cheek. Seeing their easy intimacy made Eleanor turn away as a pang of something close to envy shot through her. It wasn't that she was jealous of Imogen, quite the opposite. She was happy for her. She deserved the close relationship she and Jeff enjoyed after her first husband, Horace, had treated her so badly. But there was no denying that sometimes, when Eleanor saw them together, it made her feel lonesome. Are all the preparations going well? Imogen continued. When I saw Fiona, she said Abraham has been baking cakes non-stop for the last week, and Mr. Court has gotten the band rehearsing for the parade practically every day. Yes, I think everything should go well. Jeff handed Jessie back, and a shadow crossed his face. The only trouble is, one person has let me down. That artist who was meant to be coming from Ohio, do you remember? He was meant to be our artist in residence for the fair? Eleanor's ears pricked up. Mr. Flamber? What's happened? She had been looking forward to meeting the portrait painter, having only ever read about him in the newspaper. Leon came chasing down the street from the post office with a letter for me. Jeff pulled it from his pocket. Don't say he can't come? Imogen sighed. Jeff frowned and nodded his head. That's about right. Unfortunately, he was thrown off his horse a couple of weeks ago, and he broke his arm. He sent his apologies, but said that he wasn't prepared to display his paintings without him being there with them. Well, that sure is disappointing. And after it took you so long to persuade him to visit us as well. She patted Jeff's arm comfortingly. There's still plenty for everyone to enjoy. We've got the horse races, the band, refreshments, and then the bonfire after dark. I know, but I wanted to do something more, Jeff muttered. He took his hat off and ran a hand through his hair, looking distracted. The whole point of having an artist in residence was to show that Willow Brook is more than just a small frontier town for ranchers and miners. We've gotten several boarding houses, and if we can encourage folks to visit to take in the clean country air, maybe we'll even have a hotel soon. Dr. Clary tells me this is the perfect sort of place for folks to come and recuperate from consumption and the other terrible illnesses they have from the smog in the cities. There will be other opportunities. Imogen could sense his frustration and knew that Jeff wanted the best for their little town. Perhaps he can come next year instead, Eleanor suggested. Jessie started to grizzle a little, as it was almost time to feed him, and Imogen paced back and forth to settle him again. As she did so, she noticed Eleanor's painting again and that Jeff was staring intently at it as well. A sudden twinkle came into her eyes, and she turned toward Jeff so quickly it made Jessie giggle from the sudden movement. Wait, we don't need to worry about Mr. Flamber not coming. Not when we have a talented artist of our own right here in Willowbrook already. As Jeff nodded slowly, Eleanor felt the blood rush to her cheeks, and she hastily stood in front of her painting. I hope you're not suggesting what I think you are, she said to her sister sharply. I think Imogen's right. It's a wonderful idea, and I don't know why it didn't occur to me before, Jeff said. Would you please consider displaying your paintings instead of Mr. Flamber, Eleanor? He pleaded. The church hall is all set up for it, and it's too late for me to ask anyone else. Besides, from where I'm standing, your paintings are just as good as his. In fact, I think folks will like them more. I mean, portraits are all well and good, but now I'm thinking that your landscape pictures from in and around Willow Brook will be even more popular. Do say yes, Imogen cried. She gave her sister an encouraging smile. You know how Jacob was always so proud of your paintings. You could do it to honor his memory. Eleanor rolled her eyes and laughed. Have you no shame, Imogen? You sure know the right things to say. She felt sudden butterflies in her stomach, wondering whether she dared take up the offer. I've always admired your pictures, Eleanor, Jeff said, sounding genuine. It's a shame to keep them hidden away at High Bluff instead of letting the townsfolk enjoy them. I guess it won't harm, just this once, Eleanor said reluctantly. But don't go telling folks that I'm a proper artist. It's a hobby is all, and you know I only do this for my own pleasure. Of course. Imogen gave her an innocent smile, but her expression was still laced with mischief as she linked arms with Jeff. Although I always believed that your paintings were good enough to sell if you wanted to, and you know that's what the art dealer in Pittsburgh said to you when he saw you out painting in the park that time. You never told me that, Jeff said, looking at Eleanor with newfound respect. She's too modest. That's why, Imogen continued. Nonsense. It was just a passing comment. I expect the fellow had too much wine with his lunch, is all, Eleanor replied hastily. She needed to stop Imogen from getting carried away, and quickly. She knew that once her sister had gotten an idea in her head, she could be like a runaway train, and the whole thing might get out of hand before they knew it. See? She's too modest, Imogen repeated again with a tinkling laugh. But it's true, I promise. Getting back to the summer fair, Eleanor said firmly. I have 10 paintings, which I'm happy to display in the church hall, and I don't mind talking to a few folks about them if anyone's interested. But that's all. After the fair, I'll pack them away again, and we'll say no more about it. Jeff shot her a grateful smile. Thank you, Eleanor. That's a huge weight off my mind. It's the least I can do for all your kindness in letting me and the children stay here this last year. Perhaps we might even attract some other artists to come and visit the area. We could even offer painting tours like they do in Europe for wealthy gentlemen. Imogen's excited chatter continued as she and Jeff returned to their homestead, making Eleanor smile to herself. It was one of her sister's most endearing traits that she wanted to support Jeff in his duties as the mayor. As she picked her paintbrush up again, Eleanor's mind whirled as she thought over their conversation. Although she had been quick to rebuff Imogen's suggestions that she could sell her paintings, it was actually an idea she had been mulling over herself recently. It was true that the art dealer in Pittsburgh had offered to try selling a few to see if folks were interested. But back then, Eleanor hadn't needed to bring in an income because Jacob earned enough to take care of them. But now, if she was ever to regain her independence, she would need a way to earn a living. "Could I really sell my art?" she murmured, pausing with her brush hovering over the canvas. Just as she had done the last few times it had come into her mind, she dismissed the idea almost as quickly as it formed. It was impossible. She had never even heard of any women artists being paid for their paintings, and she had had no formal training. The likes of Mr. Flamber had probably studied at the Royal Academy of Art in Paris, so she needed to forget about it. She would take her paintings to the fair as a small way to repay Jeff's kindness and help him out of a tricky situation. And she would remind herself that Imogen's sisterly pride was just out of kindness, not an expert's opinion. The whole idea of painting for a living was just a fanciful notion that she needed to forget about. If anything, if she was to leave High Bluff Ranch and make her own way in life again, she would be better off looking for a live-in position as a housekeeper for someone who was happy to employ a widow with 2 children. She knew such jobs existed, so perhaps it was time to look properly for one. She couldn't rely on Jeff's goodwill forever. She picked up some paint on her brush and started mixing the soft, yellowish green she needed for the last highlights on the trees in her picture, and was soon absorbed in her art again. But at the back of her mind, Eleanor couldn't help but feel nervous about what might transpire the following day. It was the first time she had ever shown her paintings publicly, and even though she couldn't explain why, it felt momentous, as though it might be the start of something important. Chapter 3. Hank Mitchell leaned over the trough and plunged his head under the jet of water coming out of the water pump, enjoying the bracing effect of the coldness. If nothing else, it would help clear his mind and hopefully banish the uncharitable thoughts which had been nipping at his heels these last few months. Why did Pa prioritize Wayne when it's me who stayed at home all these years? The thought snuck into his mind again as he stood up and dragged his hands through his hair to shake some of the water out. He caught his reflection in the barn window and grabbed the old towel hanging near the trough to roughly dry himself. He had the reddish-blonde hair of his pa, John, and the blue eyes of his ma, Deborah. Wayne got the good looks as well. It was something he had long believed ever since his brother had pointed it out over 10 years ago when he was turning 21, even though plenty of local women would gladly have told him he was wrong if Hank did but no. He ran his hands through his hair one last time with a grim smile, trying to make it tidier. Now that he drove a stagecoach, he had to look more presentable than when he had just spent his days working on the ranch. "Nobody's going to want to ride with me if I look like a scarecrow," he muttered to himself. He buttoned up his shirt and shrugged his suede vest back on over his broad shoulders, telling himself it would do just fine. He had been up since dawn, getting ready for the day. His first task was fetching his 4 horses in from the field, where they grazed at night, and grooming them until they gleamed. Even if he wasn't the smartest stagecoach driver in Montana, he was determined that his animals would turn heads for all the right reasons. After all, he'd been breeding horses practically since he'd been old enough to lift a saddle over the corral fence. So he was determined that nobody would find fault in that regard. Unlike the other stagecoach drivers in the West, who always favored having 4 matching horses in their team, Hank liked to do things a little differently. He had 2 strawberry roan geldings and 2 chestnut mares, and he always hitched them in matching pairs with the geldings as the leaders in front. Seeing folks turn to look as they trotted through town gave him a quiet source of pride, not to mention reminded the local cowboys that he was always willing to break in young colts for the right price. "If things go well today, I might pick up a few new clients," Huh, Poppy? His tan and white terrier yapped and jumped up on her hind feet, eager for the journey to begin. That was something else that made him stand out. He always took Poppy with him wherever he went, and she sat up front on the box with him, wagging happily as folks called out a greeting. Hank stood back to cast a critical eye over what he had achieved so far during the morning. The stagecoach was polished, and although the paintwork needed touching up here and there, and the leather seats inside had seen better days, it was comfortable and tidy. He had braided the horses' manes and decorated them with ribbons the way one of the traveling gypsies had taught him when he was a boy, and they had stopped to help his pa with the apple harvest early one fall. Even though it took him hours to do, today was a special event. He was taking the folks who had recently arrived in Cottonwood Creek on the railroad out to Willow Brook for the summer fair. It would be a good opportunity to get his name out there and drum up some new business. If it went well, he might even catch the eye of Mayor Jeff Hayden and pick up more regular business, even though he knew the rival stagecoach firms might not look too kindly on it. "We can't worry about that, can we, Poppy?" he muttered as he picked up his horse's hooves to do one last check that there were no stones caught in them, which might send them lame. "No doubt the O'Hanlon brothers will mock my old-fashioned stagecoach and find a way to brag about how much better theirs is, but it's just part of doing business. They'll never match me on the quality of my horses, and they know it." He sighed as he thought about the unwanted rivalry that had sprung up between him and the O'Hanlons, who were convinced they should be the only stagecoach firm running around the districts of Cottonwood Creek and Willow Brook, even though they couldn't keep up with demand. "Let folks stay in one of the boarding houses or saloons until we're good and ready," was their motto. "We've been running this route for over 5 years. There's no call for anyone else to try and muscle in on our business." But it was a free world, and Hank couldn't afford to take their nasty comments and veiled threats to heart when every dollar of income counted. Besides, it wasn't as if he had much choice anymore. Wayne had made sure of that. No sooner had Hank thought about his brother than he caught sight of him out of the corner of his eye. The sun had already been up for a good hour, but Wayne Mitchell seemed unconcerned as he strolled out onto the veranda of the spacious log cabin that the Mitchell family all shared. He yawned and stretched his arms above his head before scratching his chest as he slowly pulled his crumpled shirt on. He hitched his suspenders over his shoulders and yawned again. Even from across the barnyard, Hank could see that Wayne's eyes were bleary with sleep. He didn't have to get any closer to know that there would be a fog of stale liquor on his breath, which would make him slow and bad-tempered until he had eaten breakfast and had 2 mugs of coffee. How Nora, his wife, put up with it, he had no idea. "Looks like it's going to be another hot day," Wayne drawled as he ambled across the dusty yard. "I guess I should think about moving the cattle onto a fresh pasture." It was meant to be a statement, but it came out more like a question, telling Hank that his older brother still lacked confidence in the simplest of tasks. Hank hesitated. It would have been easy to walk away and let Wayne have to figure it out for himself. But that would make me as petty as him, and if he doesn't do the right thing, the animals might suffer. The usual worries tumbled into Hank's thoughts, and he nodded. This was the problem. He was too conscientious to allow Wayne to make the inevitable mistakes that would happen if he left him to it. Wayne knew exactly how to turn Hank's worries to his advantage as well. Did that make Hank a fool? He still wasn't sure. "Yes, the grass is too short where they are at the moment," he said eventually, "and if you don't move them, they might try and break out and injure themselves on the fence. The 10-acre field next to the river would be ideal. Leastways, that's what I would do." "That's what I figured," Wayne said easily, blissfully unbothered by his own lack of knowledge. "Not that I need you telling me what to do," he mumbled under his breath. "I'll move them later this evening after the heat of the day has passed. There's no need to rush things." Hank suppressed a sigh. "It would be better to do it now while it's still not too hot, or you could have gotten out of bed earlier. You know Pa will be fretting about it all day otherwise." At the mention of their father, Wayne rolled his eyes. It might be what he would want, but I'm in charge now. Since he suffered that heart seizure and called me home to take over the place, he's turned more cantankerous than ever. I'll do it when I'm good and ready, and if he doesn't like it, well, he can barely leave the house anymore, so he'll just have to do his grumbling on the veranda and put up with it. That's not a very kind way to talk about the man who gave us all this, Hank snapped. He gazed around at the rolling, lush pastures. Emerald Plains Ranch wasn't large, but as they were on the river plain, the land was fertile, and the acreage was plenty big enough to support them all. At least it had been when it was farmed properly. Now that Wayne was in charge, he could already see things taking a turn for the worse. But it went against his nature to challenge his pa's belief that Wayne was the future of the place. As if reading his mind, Wayne leaned forward and thumped Hank on his shoulder with a sudden grin. Don't be sore about pa's decision, Hank. There ain't no point in thinking you can change his mind. Pa always said I would be in charge since we were knee-high. The oldest son gets the ranch, the youngest finds another way to make a living, Hank muttered, feeling gloomy for a moment. Yes, you don't need to remind me. It's just what? Wayne's green eyes hardened, but then he shrugged. I get it. You think that because I went away chasing gold in the Colorado mountains for 10 years and you stayed here like the dutiful son, you should be in charge of the ranch now that pa's not capable of it anymore. Huh? Something like that. Hank picked Poppy up and lifted her onto the box, and the horses fidgeted in their traces, knowing it was time to leave. It's not my fault that Pa came up with that other little rule for us to fit his requirements, is it? No, I guess not. Hank climbed up onto the seat and picked up his reins. He knew this was an argument he could never win, so there was no point wasting time trying. See you tonight. It's going to be a long day, taking folks to the Willowbrook Summer Fair, so I don't know what time I'll be home. Wayne had already started wandering off, drawn by the smell of sizzling bacon wafting from the homestead, which Nora was cooking for his breakfast. Maybe stay there the night, cut loose in Kelly's saloon for once and enjoy some of the women's company, he called over his shoulder with a rakish grin and an exaggerated wink. You don't even need to get wed, because I already beat you to that too, he added with a snort of amusement. Hank clicked his tongue to get the horses trotting faster, ignoring his brother's remark. A soulless night with a woman he might never see again was not what he wanted. He felt despondent, which was unlike him. Usually, feeling the breeze on his face and meeting new folks every week who were riding in his coach was a pleasure, but Wayne's barbed comment about not needing to get married had soured the morning. Little does he know I'd give anything to meet the right woman and get married. Huh, Poppy? He cheered up slightly as the terrier planted her small front paws on his thigh and wagged, looking up at him with her tongue lolling out, making it seem as though she was smiling. We just haven't met the right woman yet, have we? And that was why he had found himself unexpectedly the owner of a stagecoach business instead of running Emerald Plains Ranch as he turned 30. Because not only had John Mitchell told his sons that the ranch would only go to the eldest of his children, but he'd also made it clear he would only hand the place over if that son was married. It was no surprise that, upon learning that Wayne had courted and married Nora in record time, but Hank was not prepared to get married just for convenience. In spite of his rugged appearance, he had a romantic streak, and ever since the first local girl had fluttered her eyelashes at him, he had set his heart on marrying for love. The only problem was, love had proven to be elusive in the frontier lands of Montana, which was why he was still single and holding out for the right woman. Chapter 4. By the time Hank's horses trotted into Willow Brook, his conversation with Wayne that morning was long forgotten. He had 4 customers in the stagecoach, all well-to-do ladies from the East Coast, who had made the long railroad journey west to spend several months enjoying the clean air and beautiful countryside of Cottonwood Creek. At the suggestion of Mrs. Mayhew, who ran a tea room in the town, they were spending a couple of days in Willow Brook to enjoy the summer fair and for a guided walk along the river to look at the local wildflowers. Hank reined his team of horses to a halt at the center of town, where the street was wide to accommodate stagecoaches. Bunting fluttered cheerfully between the trees in the park, opposite to where he had stopped, and snatches of fiddle music drifted toward them on the breeze. "Welcome to Willow Brook," he said cheerfully as he jumped down and opened the door for his passengers to alight. "Well, isn't this just the quaintest place you've ever seen, Marjorie?" one of the women exclaimed. She shook the creases out of her ruffled skirts and looked up and down the street with evident delight. "I declare, if it weren't for the rest of my family living in New York, I'd move out here in a heartbeat," her friend Dorothy said. Her gray hair was tightly curled, and she snapped her fan open and fluttered it to cool down. "What charming little stores. We'll have to thank Mrs. Mayhew for suggesting this, my dear. Thank you for being so thoughtful and not rushing the journey," the fourth woman said to Hank as he handed her down. She placed her cane carefully next to her feet and beamed up at him with a coy smile. "I could just tell you would take good care of us. That other lot, the O'Hanlons, is it? They wanted to charge us twice as much and squeeze more folks in." Hank smiled at her. She reminded him of his ma. "Nothing's too much trouble for my passengers. I hope you enjoyed me pointing out the eagles on the way. It's not every day they fly so close, so I figured you'd like to watch them." The women twittered like excited birds as they gathered their shawls around them and prepared to explore the town. Hank had already delivered their luggage to the Blue Pines boarding house, where they were staying for several nights, and he wished them an enjoyable day. With genteel waves, the women wandered toward the park, leaving him free for a few hours until he hoped to be able to pick up some passengers traveling the other way. "Time to get the horses fed and watered, Poppy," Hank said, jumping back up onto the box and ruffling the terrier's ears. The horse livery was further along the main street, near the church, and he picked up the reins again to head there. His elevated position gave him a good view of the summer fair. Crowds of visitors thronged the street, with elegant ladies holding parasols up to guard their complexions against the bright sunshine. There was certainly a good turnout, which would no doubt please Mr. Hayden, the mayor. Groups of children darted and weaved through everyone like shoals of fish, and the usual collection of cowboys, ranchers, and swarthy miners were all in high spirits, enjoying a well-deserved day off. The sheriff would have his work cut out later, rounding up some of them who had enjoyed too much liquor at the saloon. But so far, everyone was being well behaved. Later in the day, there would be horse races and rodeo stunts in the fields at the edge of town. And he could see a mound of firewood beyond the park, where there would be a bonfire and dancing under the starlight later that evening. For a moment, Hank felt a pang of regret that he had to head back to Cottonwood Creek before sunset to earn more money from a return party of passengers. Wayne's comment about chatting with the saloon ladies was wide of the mark, but Hank couldn't deny that he'd been feeling more lonesome than ever lately, especially now that his brother was happily married. "Look at those horses, Ma. Aren't they beautiful?" Two children stood in the doorway of Betty's bakehouse, pointing toward his stagecoach, their eyes round with wonder. Their comment pulled him out of his negative thoughts, and a moment later, their ma bustled out behind them and smiled up at him. Judging by the flour-dusted apron she was wearing, he realized she must be Abraham Radcliffe's wife, the owner of the bakehouse. "Howdy, folks. It's a lovely day for your fair," Hank called, lifting his hat. "If anyone needs to travel back to Cottonwood Creek, tell them to ask for Hank Mitchell." "We sure will, Mr. Mitchell," Fiona Radcliffe called. "That's a fine-looking team of horses you have." He had already drawn several admiring glances as folks pointed at the fancy braids he had done in his horses' manes, and he smiled inwardly. The O'Hanlon brothers would consider getting up 2 hours earlier to prepare his horses in that way a complete waste of time. But he got pleasure from showing off his animals for the magnificent creatures that they were. As he gazed around at all the activity in the town, which was usually so quiet, he noticed a dark-haired woman standing nearby. She was leaning against a picket fence out the front of the church, holding a book in her hands. Her intense gaze fixed on his horses for a few seconds. Then she looked down at her book. Although he couldn't be sure, it looked as though she was sketching in the book, or jotting down some notes, which piqued his curiosity. He slowed the horses down as he approached the horse livery, wondering whether he should call a greeting, but there was something about the fierce concentration of her expression that made him think she probably wouldn't even hear him. "Want me to water your horses?" A boy ran out of the livery, already dragging a pail of water with him. "Leave them here with us, Mr. Mitchell, and you can go and enjoy the summer fair. It's only a couple of coins for the day, and I'll take good care of them." Hank nodded and climbed down, handing the boy a coin. "Uh-huh. Just be sure to give them some shade, all right? It's a long trip back to Cottonwood Creek later. I'll pay you double if you treat them well." The boy grinned widely and tilted a hat that was several sizes too big for him to the back of his head, like a seasoned cowboy. "You won't find anyone better than me to look after your animals, Mr. Mitchell." He lowered his voice, and his brown eyes glinted with mischief above a freckled snub nose. "Don't say I told you, but your horses are the best ones in the district. Better than those scrawny ones the O'Hanlons use. Poor things. And Dexter O'Hanlon always tries to get away with paying me less than we agree." Hank chuckled. "I think we understand the quality of a good animal, Morris. Maybe when you're older, your pa might let you come and help me break some colts in. I could use a good youngster with your sort of eye." "Really?" Morris puffed his chest out. "I'll tell Pa tonight once the excitement of the fair is over." "I'd love that, Mr. Mitchell." Hank helped Morris lead the horses through a narrow alleyway into the livery yard out back and uncoupled the traces so his animals could have a proper rest. The O'Hanlons' horses were dozing in the full glare of the sun nearby, and flies buzzed around their flanks where the harness had rubbed their skin. He shook his head with annoyance. "Put some balm on those wounds before they turn bad," he muttered to Morris. "I was going to, but sometimes they don't like anyone doing something without their say-so." The boy looked worried and tugged his lip. "Dexter and Danny are already in the saloon, so maybe they won't notice? If they complain, tell them I told you to do it. It's unkind having chafing like that on their flanks, with the flies bothering them." Once Hank had satisfied himself that his animals were all right, he wandered back out to the street. The town clock had just chimed the hour, and he figured he had plenty of time to have a good look around and grab something to eat before coming back. He glanced up and down the street, hoping the dark-haired woman might still be there, but she was nowhere to be seen. Feeling momentarily disappointed, he suddenly spotted Jeff Hayden, the town's mayor, heading into the small barn by the church, which was used as a hall for social events after Sunday service. "That's just who we need to talk to," Hank said as Poppy scampered ahead of him, sniffing all the enticing smells of the street. The cool interior of the church hall provided a welcome break from the hot sun, and he took his hat off and ran a hand through his thick hair. As his eyes adjusted from the brightness outside, he was surprised to see paintings hanging on the walls and people milling around, talking about them in admiring tones. He had assumed the hall was being used for something like the quilting bee and refreshments, but figured it would be rude to turn and walk straight back out again. He peered around, hoping to have a word with Mayor Hayden about running more regular stagecoach trips between Willowbrook and the surrounding towns. But he was deep in conversation with the sheriff, so he didn't want to interrupt. Suddenly, his heart leaped as he spotted the dark-haired woman who had been watching his horses outside earlier. He eyed her surreptitiously, taking in her elegant blue dress and the way her creamy complexion was slightly flushed. She looked to be a similar age to him, and every now and again a musical laugh came from her ruby-red lips as she chatted easily to a small group of ladies who had gathered around her. "Have I seen her in town before?" Hank cast his mind back. She looked comfortable enough to be local rather than a visitor to the town, but he knew he couldn't recall seeing her before. He would have remembered, he was sure. "Aren't these pictures delightful?" Marjorie from the stagecoach loomed into view, fluttering her fan. "I've been to exhibitions in New York that weren't as good as this, and to think this quaint little town has such talented folk here. It really is a hidden gem, and I'll be telling all my friends about it when we go home again." I guess so," Hank mumbled. He walked closer to the painting hanging nearest to them and gave it more of his attention so as not to look ignorant. If cultured high society ladies from back east were saying the art was delightful, he owed it a better look, and within seconds, he found himself entranced. At first glance, to his untrained eye, they looked good, but the more he looked at them, the harder he found it to look away. Each landscape scene pulled him in and held his attention, stirring up heartwarming emotions as he quietly soaked in the beauty of the jagged mountains and tumbling rivers captured in exquisite detail. "Didn't I tell you?" Marjorie said, with another flutter of her fan. "I must go and get the other ladies. They won't want to miss this." She hurried away in a cloud of lavender perfume, and Hank turned back to his favorite painting, which depicted the river plains near his ranch after a storm. The way the shafts of sunlight glinted off the river, and the grass glittered with raindrops, made him almost able to smell the earthy scent of rain on the hot, dusty ground, which was so familiar to him. A rustle next to him snapped him out of his reverie, and he was surprised to see the dark-haired woman standing nearby. "These are incredible," he said quietly. He glanced around, wondering where the mayor had gone so he could tell him it was an inspired idea to have an art exhibition. "Do you know who the artist is? I should congratulate him." He ran a hand through his hair again, feeling slightly out of place. "I mean, it's not that I'm an expert, but I like seeing our local area in paintings instead of those stuffy pictures of historical figures I saw in a gallery once." His vest felt too tight, and he wondered if he'd embarrassed himself as a shy smile tugged at the woman's mouth. "You're talking to the artist," she murmured, lowering her eyes for a moment, as though it was hard to admit. "I mean, I wouldn't call myself that, but I painted these," she added, gesturing to the pictures. "Oh, I'm sorry. That was rude of me to assume it must be a man. The real artist, Mr. Flamber, who was meant to be showing his portraits, couldn't come. Jeff, Mayor Hayden persuaded me to hang a few of my pictures instead, but I only paint as a hobby." "You did these. What a talent you have," Hank blurted out. He felt foolish as she blushed again. "I mean, I wouldn't know where to start, but you have captured the views I see when I'm driving my stagecoach about the district." The woman nodded in sudden recognition. "You're the stagecoach driver, of course. I hope you didn't mind me sketching your horses earlier. They look so unusual, the way you've braided their manes. It reminded me of the horses I saw in a traveling circus I went to in Pittsburgh once." Before Hank could reply, a woman with similar coloring hurried over toward them, ushering a portly gentleman by her side. "Mr. Featherly is very taken with one of your paintings, Eleanor. He wants to talk about purchasing it." "I can't leave without congratulating you," the man boomed. His cheeks were red with the heat, and he seized Eleanor's hand, pressing a kiss to the back of it with a flourish. "Your sister told me the paintings are for sale, perhaps? That one over there of the river would look perfect over the mantel in my study, and I simply must have it." "Excuse me," Eleanor murmured, giving Hank an apologetic smile. She bobbed her head toward the gentleman. "I really had no intention of selling these, and I'm sure my sister, Imogen, was just being kind by saying you could buy one. Are you sure about what you said? I'm not a professional artist by any means." "Nonsense," the portly man said, seizing her hand again. "I wouldn't mind having one of these if my husband agrees," another woman said, hurrying over. "That one of the mountains and horses is my favorite." She edged Mr. Featherly out of the way and started rummaging in her reticule. "Let me give you my husband's calling card. I don't want to miss out." "I think it's best that everyone who wants to buy one of Eleanor's paintings forms an orderly queue," Imogen cried, spotting an opportunity. She grabbed a piece of paper and a pencil and started jotting down names as two more couples started arguing over a small painting of Willow Brook cloaked in snow. "Oh my, this has taken me rather by surprise," Eleanor confided as she shot Hank a wry smile. "I only brought them to the hall to help Mayor Hayden, and now it seems Imogen is turning it into some sort of art auction unless I stop her." "Perhaps it was God's will that more people should see them," Hank said softly. "I'm flattered that you sketched my horses. I'd like to draw them again, properly, to turn into a painting. Do you come to Willowbrook often?" Before she could finish her sentence, Imogen grabbed Eleanor's arm and swept her away. "Come on," she said. "Folks are clamoring to buy the pictures. There's no time to stand around chatting." Eleanor glanced back toward him over her shoulder, and when their eyes met, Hank felt an unusual sensation in his chest, which he couldn't quite explain. Was it attraction? Desire? He wasn't sure. But as Mr. Featherly monopolized her attention to discuss the price of the painting he wanted, Hank wished he could have spent more time in her company. There was something unusual about Eleanor. She had hidden depths that stirred something deep in his heart, and he prayed that somehow their paths might cross again. Who am I kidding? He thought as people pressed around her. What would someone as talented and elegant as her want with a lowly stagecoach driver? The spark of connection he had felt between them fizzled out like rain falling on embers, and he turned on his heel to walk back outside. There was no point falling for someone who was clearly destined for better things. Besides, hadn't she mentioned Pittsburgh? For all he knew, she was only visiting her sister from back east. He tried to put her out of his mind. Think about the business. Don't go losing your heart to a woman you'll never see again. Poppy scampered ahead of him toward a stall that was selling cakes, and Hank followed, trying to ignore the fact that all he really wanted to do was head back into the hall and find a way of talking to her again. Chapter 5. "I told you folks would like your paintings, didn't I?" Imogen said, turning on the buckboard wagon seat to look at Eleanor. Buttercup, her horse, was trotting along at a smart pace as they approached Cottonwood Creek, and the breeze lifted Eleanor's curls from her neck, making it feel pleasantly cool. Eleanor gave her a wry smile of acknowledgement. "I know, but I figured you were just being kind-hearted because you're my sister." "I honestly never expected to sell a single painting, let alone 6 of them, and then a promise of more interest when I paint some new ones." "I think it helped that Mr. Featherly had such a loud voice," Imogen chuckled. "As soon as the folks at the back of the hall heard that he wanted to buy one, they didn't want to be left out." 3 days had passed since the summer fair, and Eleanor was slowly coming to accept the fact that her pictures had been snapped up. She still felt a prickle of something between awkwardness and pride as she recalled how several folks had jostled to pay her, which was something she had never experienced before. "Jacob would have been pleased, don't you think?" she murmured. Her late husband had adored her paintings. It was he who had insisted on framing several of them when they lived in Pittsburgh, and part of her wished he could have known he'd been right to say they would be popular enough to sell. "He would have been so proud of you," Imogen agreed. She nudged her sister to stop her from feeling downhearted about his passing. "We'll go to the hotel first, shall we? And then maybe we could have tea and cake at Mrs. Mayhew's tea shop. What do you say?" Eleanor nodded and glanced at the parcel in the back of the wagon. It was one of her paintings of the view from High Bluff Ranch, which she had promised to deliver to Dorothy Wexford, who was staying in Cottonwood Creek with her friends before she returned to New York. She could hardly believe her painting would be gracing the walls of an elegant brownstone house of a high society lady like Dorothy. "And what about the other thing we've been talking about?" Imogen asked, lifting her eyebrows inquisitively. "It would be silly not to make an inquiry while we're here." She looked pointedly toward the 2 hearts entwined matrimonial bureau, which they just happened to be passing on the way into town. Eleanor hesitated for a moment and then reluctantly nodded. "I know you and Jeff are an inspiring example of finding love again with Mrs. McKinnon's help, and I have been feeling lonesome." Imogen's expression was suddenly serious. "You know that Jeff is happy for you to carry on living with us at High Bluff Ranch for as long as you want, so don't think I'm saying this to imply otherwise. But I've noticed that you've seemed sad lately. Jacob was a wonderful husband, and I know you loved him dearly, and you have Isaac and Lily to remember him by. But I do honestly believe that it's possible to find love more than once in life." She squeezed Eleanor's hand. "I want you to be happy again, not lonely." Imogen guided Buttercup to the side of the street outside the railroad office, and Robert, the station master's son, ran out to hitch Buttercup to the post for them. "I've been resisting your hints," Eleanor said, with a short laugh, "as I'm sure you've noticed." "You don't say." Thank you, Robert. Imogen tightened her shawl as the boy scratched Buttercup's neck affectionately. But the success of my paintings at the summer fair has convinced me that it's time to open myself to new experiences for my mind and my heart. So I guess it wouldn't harm to speak to Mrs. McKinnon and express my interest in using her services. But only after we've visited Dorothy at the Glenwood Hotel first. Imogen grabbed her sister and gave her a hearty hug. That's wonderful, she exclaimed excitedly. I know you won't regret it, and whatever happens, it will be an adventure. Her expression suddenly clouded. Just promise me, you won't go too far away. I sure would miss you and the children. I've been praying that she will know of someone in this area. Eleanor picked the painting up and climbed down from her seat. There's something about this part of Montana that has inspired my art, and I don't want to lose that. Excuse me, Mrs. Hayden, Robert said as he started loosening the reins on Buttercup. Did I hear you mention you might be going to see Mrs. McKinnon? Yes, Robert. We'll be a couple of hours in town, I expect, so if you could give Buttercup some water and oats like you usually do, I'd appreciate it. Of course, ma'am. The boy scratched his head and grinned up at them. I'm not being nosy, but I thought you might want to know that Mrs. McKinnon is coming to the railroad station in a little while to meet some of the new mail-order brides off the train. You'd better visit her before you go to the Glenwood, else she might not be there. Eleanor felt a ripple of nerves in her stomach as Imogen thanked the boy for his information and handed over a couple of coins for him to look after Buttercup and the wagon for them. It won't harm to take the painting with us while we go to the matrimonial bureau, Imogen said firmly as she saw the doubts flitting across Eleanor's face. I suppose not. Eleanor tucked the picture under her arm, knowing that her sister didn't want to give her an excuse for not making an inquiry about looking for a new husband. Maybe we'll bump into some friends while we're here, Imogen said brightly as they set off along the street. She kept up a steady stream of chatter, and Eleanor's nerves settled. In her heart, she knew that Jacob would not have wanted her to stay alone and lonely for the rest of her life. If it had been the other way around, she would have wanted Jacob to marry again and find happiness, so her spirits started to lift as she wondered what the visit might hold. Let me carry that for you, Imogen said, taking the picture as she pushed the door open and ushered Eleanor into the Two Hearts Entwined Matrimonial Bureau. A bell tinkled to announce their arrival, and Mrs. McKinnon jumped up from behind her desk and bustled over. I'm just finishing up with Miss Sanchez, so do take a seat. And may I say how lovely it is to see you again, Mrs. Hayden. I hear your husband is doing marvelous things to put Willow Brook on the map now that he's mayor. She gestured toward two seats near the window and returned to her desk. Imogen propped the picture up against the wall, not bothering to keep it covered up when the soft cotton sheet it was wrapped in slipped open. It's good for folks to see your paintings, she whispered when Eleanor nudged her. You never know where your next sale might come from, and Mrs. McKinnon is very well connected in these parts. Eleanor knew there was no point in insisting she should hide the painting. Imogen was right. She did need to get more used to folks seeing her creations if she was to sell more. She tugged her lace gloves off and put them in her reticule, using the time to gaze around the office. It was hard to imagine that Imogen's marriage to Jeff had been set in motion from this very room over a year ago, when Jeff had asked Mrs. McKinnon to place an advertisement for him in the Matrimonial Times. And now they were happily married and had their own growing family with baby Jessie. Who would think that love might blossom from such practical beginnings? The thought brought a smile to her face. She had half expected the matrimonial bureau to be like a comfortable front parlor with cozy women's touches, given that Mrs. McKinnon was in the business of love and marriage. But instead, the room was briskly efficient. There was a desk with chairs on either side and a large ledger for her to take notes. The only nod to romance was the red velvet drapes, which fell in ruffles and swags on either side of the window, and a painting of a couple walking hand in hand through a flowery meadow hanging behind the desk. I'll call in next time I'm in Cottonwood Creek, Miss Sanchez said as she stood up to leave. She had raven black hair and angular features, which made her look rather formidable. Of course, and I'm sure we'll have great success. Mrs. McKinnon added one final note to her ledger with a flourish and stood up as well. She suddenly caught sight of Eleanor's painting and clasped her hands to her chest. "What a delightful picture," she exclaimed. "Have you just purchased it to take out to the ranch? Or perhaps to hang in Mayor Hayden's office? It's a charming likeness of the mountains near Willow Brook." "Eleanor painted it," Imogen said quickly before her sister could play it down. "Her pictures were displayed at the summer fair, and quite a few folks purchased them. We're delivering this one to a very well-to-do lady who's staying at the Glenwood. She lives in a grand house in New York, you know." "Hush, Imogen. I'm sure they don't need to know that." Eleanor shot an apologetic smile at Miss Sanchez, who had walked over for a closer look at the painting. "It's just something I do for pleasure. The fact that a few folks wanted to buy them took me quite by surprise." Miss Sanchez tilted her head slightly and stared at the painting with a thoughtful expression. "I can see you have a good eye," she muttered, almost to herself. Eleanor didn't know whether to be flattered or not. There was something about the woman's terse words that left her feeling unsure of herself. "We live at High Bluff Ranch in Willow Brook, if you want to commission a picture," Imogen said brazenly. "Although if everything goes to plan and Mrs. McKinnon finds my sister a lovely husband, who knows?" "You are shameless," Eleanor whispered with a wry smile once Miss Sanchez had left. Imogen shrugged and chuckled. "Jeff always tells me I'm good at business matters, so I figured I'd help you out. That's all." "So, how can I help you today?" Mrs. McKinnon asked from behind her desk. "Might it be that you are hoping to follow in your sister's footsteps?" She gave Eleanor a coy smile. Eleanor hesitated for a moment, knowing this was the point of no return, and then nodded. Yes, please, I think it's time." "How wonderful. It was a great honor to bring Imogen and Jeff together, and I shall endeavor to help you in any way I can." The older woman perched her glasses on her nose and pulled her ledger closer. "I should probably explain that I was very happily married, but my husband was killed back in Pittsburgh 2 years ago. I have 6-year-old twins, a boy and a girl. So although I do want to marry again, it's very important that I don't want to rush into anything too hastily and regret it later." Mrs. McKinnon opened her ledger and gave her an understanding smile, which Eleanor found reassuring. "That's what many of my clients tell me, so I completely appreciate your position. Why don't you tell me a little more about yourself and the sort of gentleman you might like to start courting?" Imogen leaned over the desk. "Are we right in thinking that most of the people you help are the single gentlemen here in Cottonwood Creek and the surrounding areas?" "That's what Jeff explained to me when I first arrived, that there are far more men in the frontier towns than single ladies, which is why so many women travel from back east as I did." "That's it exactly," Mrs. McKinnon said. Her eyes twinkled as she nodded. "I expect you might like to try and stay in this area so as not to be too far from Imogen." Eleanor felt reassured that the older lady seemed to understand exactly what her worries might be, without her even having to spell them out. "Yes, I came out here with my sister over a year ago, and I'd hate for us all to have more disruption now that we've gotten to know this area. My children love the ranch, so it would be nice if we could still visit sometimes. And Imogen was a great support to me when I was widowed." "It can be hard for ladies to settle somewhere new out west." She gestured at her ledger. "The good news is that I have plenty of gentlemen on my books from around here, so there's no reason why you can't stay around Cottonwood Creek, which isn't too far to head back to the ranch." I wondered about looking for a work position, such as being a housekeeper. We do have gentlemen who put that in their advertisements, for sure. But where it could lead to becoming married, Imogen interjected hastily, shooting Eleanor an exasperated look. "This is about my sister having a second chance at love, not just to find work." For the next few minutes, Eleanor haltingly tried to pull from her mind what she hoped for if she was to marry again. There were practical matters, like the fact that she hoped to be with someone of a similar age. And of course, it was important that her new husband would be happy to welcome Isaac and Lily into their life. When it came to explaining emotional matters, it was harder. I can't really explain why my marriage to Jacob worked so well. The meaning of love is hard to pin down, Mrs. McKinnon agreed, her eyes momentarily misting over. That's why so many poets and authors have written so much about it, she added, chuckling and getting back to business. But don't worry, I have a skill for matchmaking, and I won't let you down. Although Jacob and I were somewhat different, he always encouraged me to carry on painting. Eleanor racked her brain, trying to articulate what she yearned for. Rather surprisingly, a sudden memory of the stagecoach driver and his rugged good looks and attentive blue-eyed gaze popped into her head, but she pushed it hastily away as Mrs. McKinnon gave her another encouraging nod, waiting for her to continue. I don't presume to meet another man who will fill the same space in my heart as Jacob, but I would like to be with someone kind-hearted so we can look forward to the future together and enjoy each other's company. We'd have good friends and family and be part of a small community where folks know each other. It's funny you should mention your painting, Mrs. McKinnon said, looking up from the notes that she had just finished writing. How so? By a strange coincidence, the lady who was here before you, Miss Sanchez, is the sister of an artist from Manhattan, New York. She and her brother traveled here recently and live just outside Willow, Brook. It's to help his health, but mainly because he wanted to paint the landscapes around these parts. Her gaze drifted toward Eleanor's painting, and she shook her head slightly. Serendipity indeed. Miss Sanchez has just asked me to place an advertisement looking for a wife for him. He's an artist, you say? The eagerness in Imogen's question was infectious, and Eleanor couldn't help but feel curious. He sure is. The only reason he didn't come in himself is that she said he was too busy painting. He usually leaves practical matters to his sister, but she might head back east before winter sets in, and so he figured it was time to get married. What do you think, Eleanor? Imogen muttered as Mrs. McKinnon flicked back one page in her letter and tapped her finger on what she had written earlier. It must be a sign. Surely we should find out more about him. Fraser Sanchez is seeking a woman who would be happy to live in as a housekeeper to start with, so they have a chance to get to know one another, but with a view to marrying if there is a romantic connection between them, Mrs. McKinnon read out. Miss Sanchez lives with her brother, so she was eager to stress that whoever he ends up inviting west will not have her honor compromised. So they live near Willow Brook? Eleanor folded her hands on the desk in front of her, her mind swirling at this revelation. This was exactly what she had hoped for. Somewhere not too far from Imogen and Jeff, and the chance to take things slowly in a housekeeping position first. When Imogen had accepted Jeff's proposal, they had only gotten to know each other through their letters, and this was what Eleanor had been most worried about if she went down the route of being a mail-order bride as well. Before she could reply, the bell on the door tinkled again, and Eleanor was surprised to see that it was none other than Miss Sanchez returning. "Are you by any chance here seeking a husband?" she asked as soon as the door was closed again. She gave Eleanor a look that was hard to read, not bothering with niceties as she waited for a reply. "She is," Mrs. McKinnon said, jumping up from her seat. "And I think fate has played a hand in this, ladies," she exclaimed happily. "What are the chances of you placing an advertisement for your brother, who is an artist, who wants a housekeeper, who might then become his wife, and then you, Eleanor, also being interested in painting and looking for a second husband?" "Really? So I was right?" Miss Sanchez tapped her fan on her lip as though she was weighing up the situation. "That's why I came back. When I saw your painting, I figured you and Fraser would have a lot in common." Eleanor held up her hands and shook her head. It felt as though the situation was getting out of control fast. She had only come in expecting to have a polite chat with Mrs. McKinnon, but here they were, talking about a possible match already. "You have to understand, Miss Sanchez, that I am a widow with 2 children. It's true that I was looking for a housekeeping position, and I had hoped to marry again, but it's very important that wherever I go, my children will be made welcome as well." "I'm sure it would be fine," Miss Sanchez said with an airy wave of her arm. "This is perfect." Mrs. McKinnon's curls bobbed as she nodded eagerly and looked at Eleanor with a persuasive smile. Instead of only being able to get to know one another by correspondence, you can meet in person. I often conduct chaperoned meetings. I can already sense that this would be a match made in heaven, and I'm rarely wrong. So, would you consider it? Miss Sanchez asked briskly. Eleanor was rather taken aback by the woman's direct manner, but figured she had nothing to lose. Go on, Eleanor, Imogen urged. Mr. Sanchez sounds ideal. I can come to the meeting as well if that's what you would like. Miss Sanchez pursed her lips, clearly still thinking about how it might happen. Even if you decide just to come as a housekeeper, I'm sure Fraser would be delighted to have you with us. The position is well paid, and your children will of course be able to come with you. She eyed Eleanor appraisingly and then smiled as though she was pleased with what she saw. And then, if you and Fraser fall in love, you can get married. I think that would work very well for everyone, don't you? We sure do, don't we, Eleanor? Imogen said, nudging her. Eleanor took a deep breath. She had a sense that once she agreed, life might never be quite the same again. But isn't this what I've prayed for these last few months? To find love again and look to the future. She thought about the fact that Fraser Sanchez was an artist. It had to be more than a coincidence, surely? I agree, she said. She reached out and shook hands with Miss Sanchez. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I'm looking forward to meeting your brother as well. Thank you for suggesting it. The pleasure is all mine, Miss Sanchez replied. She smiled at Eleanor, but her dark eyes were still cool, and Eleanor felt a trickle of concern, hoping she hadn't just made a terrible mistake. Chapter 6. Eleanor picked up the basket of wet shirts and balanced it on her hip as she opened the door to go outside. She paused on the veranda to look at the unfamiliar view. Instead of the rolling pastures and majestic mountains that she had grown to love at High Bluff Ranch, the landscape in front of her was gentler. The ranch house that Stella Sanchez had arranged for her brother to rent sat a short ride out of Willow Brook, not far from the river. It came with a modest plot of land, little more than 3 fields, which had been left untended since the owner had gone to live in California. There were no cattle to graze the land and keep the weeds at bay, which gave it a slightly neglected air. I'll get used to it soon enough, she muttered to herself. She put the basket down for a moment and fanned herself with the corner of her apron. She wasn't sure if there was a storm brewing or if it was because they were on the lowlands compared to Jeff's ranch, but the air felt heavy and humid without the benefit of a fresh mountain breeze. She crossed the dusty yard, heading for the washing line, which was strung between the edge of a dilapidated barn and a pine tree that had a gnarly trunk and ivy growing up it. Other than a couple of horses standing in the shade of a small stand of aspen trees, swishing their tails lazily against the flies, the place felt strangely deserted. It was a far cry from the bustle and routine she was accustomed to when she'd been living with Imogen and Jeff, where there was always something going on around the barns and in the corral. She looked around, trying to picture what the place could become, with a bit of care and attention invested in it. The homestead was nice enough, but it seemed a shame that the land and barns had fallen into disuse. What this place needs is some chickens and perhaps a few goats, maybe even a pig. It would be good to have piglets running around. She smiled at how her mind was eager to see changes, swiftly followed by a pang of what felt like homesickness. Of course, she missed Imogen and Jeff, and Jillian, Jeff's ma. Not to mention Mervyn and Frank, the 2 ranch hands at High Bluff Ranch. But it wasn't just the people who had left a hole in her life now that she had moved. Even though she had never kept any pets when she lived in Pittsburgh, animals were part of the way of ranch life in Montana. She missed Bluey, Jeff's loyal hound, and seeing the barn cats sunning themselves, waiting to have some milk tipped into their bowl after Imogen milked the cow every morning. Yes, this place was altogether too quiet for her liking. But it's what I agreed to. She thought with a weary sigh. Can we help you, Ma? Isaac called. He was dragging a stick through the dust from where he had been building a den, trying to find something to pass the time now that school had stopped for the summer. Do you think Aunt Imogen might visit us today? Lily asked hopefully, trailing across the yard behind her brother. She looked as forlorn as Eleanor felt. and she felt a pang of guilt for thinking that this would be better for the children than being at Jeff's ranch. "I don't think so," Eleanor said. Lily's face fell. "But we can hang these shirts out to dry. Then how about you both help me bake some cakes? I have dried fruit to make fruitcake, or we could make gingerbread." "Do you think Mr. Sanchez would take us down to the river this evening to go fishing?" Isaac's brown eyes looked eager for a moment. "I could teach him how to fish if he doesn't know how." He lifted his stick and pretended to cast it over some imaginary water. "I bet we could catch something, and Mervyn gave me a spare fishing rod as a present, so I could lend it to Mr. Sanchez." Eleanor glanced toward the silent log cabin under the shimmering heat and shook her head. "Mr. Sanchez isn't feeling too good today, Isaac," she explained gently. "He has another headache, and Dr. Clary told him it's best he should stay out of the sun until he's feeling better. If we were still at the ranch, Frank or Mervyn would have enjoyed going fishing with Isaac." The traitorous thought made Eleanor feel even worse. Isaac sighed disconsolately. "It's a bit dull here, Ma." He picked the basket up to make it easier for her to peg out the wet shirts, wanting to be helpful. "I preferred it when we lived at Uncle Jeff's ranch. I wish—" He stopped abruptly and sniffed, determined not to cry. "There's no point wishing we still lived there," Lily said, ever the practical one. "Ma explained she had to get a job to make a better life for us," she added firmly, giving her brother a stern look. "We're very fortunate that we still live close enough to see Aunt Imogen and Uncle Jeff at church on Sundays." Isaac kicked the toe of his boot in the dust and nodded, pulling a slight face. "I know," he mumbled. "I just miss the animals, that's all." Eleanor's heart squeezed with sympathy for her children. She had spent several long nights deliberating over Stella Sanchez's offer after her first meeting with Fraser had taken place. He seemed like a nice enough man, if a little timid compared to Stella's forthright manner. If Eleanor had hoped to feel her heart skip a beat with attraction, she was sorely disappointed. But then she reminded herself that love could grow slowly. Fraser Sanchez was offering a housekeeping job and the security of a roof over her head for Isaac and Lily, with marriage after a while. "What other choice does a widow like me have?" she had finally concluded after another night of tossing and turning, trying to figure out if she was doing the right thing. So, 2 weeks ago, Jeff had loaded up the wagon with a few of her belongings and brought Eleanor and the children to the Maple Tree Ranch homestead. She slept in a small bedroom with Isaac and Lily at the end of the house and rose before dawn to start the cooking and cleaning Stella expected. Their arrangement was that if her chores were finished by lunchtime, she could spend the afternoon painting, which Eleanor was grateful for. Almost every day she wondered how soon she would feel more settled because she knew the children were finding it hard to adjust. But we can't give up so soon. I have to give it a fair chance. It's bound to feel strange for a little while. Her thoughts were in turmoil, and she pinned a smile on her face, trying to make the best of things. She had to think of something to help the children, otherwise her heart would break to see them unhappy. "How about we ask Mr. Sanchez if we could get a puppy?" she suggested, blurting out the first idea that came to mind. "Can we really?" Isaac squealed excitedly, brightening immediately. "Mrs. Noakes's dog at the Blue Pines boarding house has had a litter of puppies. I saw them playing in her yard the last time we went into town." "Please say we can, Ma." Lily's eyes shone with joy as she picked up another shirt and draped it over the washing line. "Can we have a girl and call her Bluey, like Uncle Jeff's dog? I promise we won't let her disturb Mr. Sanchez if he has a headache." It was the first time since the move that Eleanor could see genuine happiness on their sweet faces, and she nodded, hoping that Fraser and Stella would agree. "We'll bake Mr. Sanchez's favorite cake, ginger sponge, and then I'll ask him tonight. I'm sure he'll say yes." Her heart lifted as she figured that this might help them finally settle into their new lives. "A puppy? I cannot possibly agree," Stella said angrily as Eleanor gathered up the bowls and dishes after they had finished dinner that night. Stella glared at the children. "Dogs are noisy and dirty. How can my dear brother Fraser focus on painting his masterpieces with a puppy causing havoc?" "We'll make sure she's quiet," Lily said in a small voice. You'll hardly know she's here, Isaac added. His jaw clenched, and there was a mutinous look on his face. It's not right living on a ranch with no animals. Everyone knows that. Isaac, mind your manners and apologize to Miss Sanchez. That's very rude. Eleanor's heart sank as she saw Stella's lips pinch into a thin line of disapproval. I'm sorry, Miss Sanchez, Isaac said hastily. His cheeks flushed a dull red, and he looked down at his lap, clearly close to tears. I'm sure it hasn't been easy for you all, starting a new life with us, Fraser said diplomatically. That's kind of you, but that's no reason for the children to be impolite. Eleanor's heart ached to see her children wilt under Stella's icy stare, but she had to keep the peace. I think we've been most accommodating, Stella insisted, giving her brother an opaque look before turning back to Eleanor. I'm sure a widow in your position, with 2 young children, doesn't have too many choices, she added, not worrying about whether her comment would hurt Eleanor's feelings. I guess not. Eleanor stacked the plates and took a sip of water as an awkward silence stretched between them. I suppose it's only natural that your children miss being with Mayor Hayden and the rest of your family, Stella finally added begrudgingly. Her dark eyes glittered with annoyance. I think I'll take coffee in my parlor. It's been a very trying day, what with Fraser's headache stopping him from working. We have clients waiting for their paintings, and goodness knows how much we've fallen behind with all these distractions. She glanced at Isaac and Lily again, making it plain what she meant. Eleanor's first instinct was to rush to the bedroom and pack her bags, but she took a calming breath and nodded at Stella in acknowledgement of what she had said. I'll bring your coffee through shortly. She couldn't go running back to Imogen and Jeff at the first hint of things not going smoothly. Besides, her pride would not allow her to admit that she was finding it hard. She stood up with the plates and squared her shoulders, determined to make things right. It's time for bed now, children, she said. Run along and have a wash, and then I'll be in to read a story to you shortly after I've done my kitchen chores. Good night, Miss Sanchez and Mr. Sanchez, they chorused before hurrying away. As soon as Isaac and Lily had left the room, Eleanor turned back to Stella and Fraser to try to make things right between them. I'm sorry for Isaac's house outburst. What with losing their pa when they were only 4, things have been hard for them. I'm sure, Miss Sanchez said crisply. But still, a puppy was not part of my plan for Fraser's painting sabbatical in Montana. They just love animals, Eleanor continued, wanting them to understand. Learning to care for the horses and cattle at High Bluff Ranch helped them get over Jacob's death. She wondered whether Stella might relent, but her expression remained impassive. Well, I understand that you're not here to run this place like a proper ranch with cattle and farm animals, she finished quietly. Hopefully, you'll be able to start painting again soon, she added, smiling at Fraser. Strangely enough, she hadn't seen him pick up a paintbrush or even do any sketching in the 2 weeks since she'd arrived. She wanted to ask why, but didn't want to pry into his affairs so soon in their arrangement. Perhaps that was how real artists worked, she thought. Stella nodded graciously, accepting the apology. Perhaps my brother should make the final decision about the puppy, as I shall be traveling back east to our family home in New York after the winter. Eleanor could sense a ripple of tension between Stella and Fraser, so she hastily excused herself to go and wash the dishes. Keeping busy helped to take her mind off the situation, and by the time the sun was starting to set, she bustled through to the bedroom to say good night to her children. I'm sorry, Ma, Isaac said again. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. We were just really disappointed about not being allowed to have a puppy, is all. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed and brushed a lock of sandy-colored hair back from his forehead before leaning over and kissing both of them good night. Maybe they just need a little more time to get used to the idea, she murmured, hoping it was true. It seemed as though Stella ruled the household, and Fraser just agreed with whatever she said. I'm going to pray they change their minds, Lily whispered. Her eyelids were getting heavy, and Eleanor smiled as they drifted off to sleep. She would never tire of looking at the way their eyelashes fanned on their rosy cheeks and how they always turned to face each other when they slept. It had been like that since they were tiny babies. As she tiptoed out of the room a few minutes later and went outside to fetch the dry shirts back in again, she wrestled with her emotions. Stella would not be staying with them forever, and she had a feeling that without his domineering sister in charge, Fraser had the potential to be a kind-hearted man. It was never going to be easy finding love again, but perhaps she had to give him a chance before making any hasty decisions. She folded the shirts carefully into the basket and allowed herself a few minutes to appreciate the cooler evening and try to look for something good in her situation. "What would I want folks to see if I was going to paint this scene?" she murmured to herself. She looked at her surroundings again, and her spirits started to lift. Although the views at Maple Tree Ranch were not as dramatic as High Bluff, there was a certain rustic charm about the old wooden barns. Now that she was really looking, instead of rushing through her chores, she noticed how the streaky pink sunset sky was reflected in the river, and the long, dried grass rippled in the breeze. It almost made her want to rush back to the cabin to fetch her paints to capture the moment. "I've been too hasty to judge my new life against what we had before, which isn't fair to Fraser." The thought took her by surprise, but she felt a new sense of peace in her heart. She also realized she had been so busy she had forgotten the one thing that had always helped her in the past, her faith and praying to her Lord. She lowered her head. "God, please forgive me for being too hasty to find fault. I've realized I need to show the children that we need to be patient if we're to settle into this new situation. Thank you for your divine beauty in the land here and for opening my eyes again to appreciating it, even though it's different from the mountains I've gotten used to." She smiled as a flock of finches swooped down to dust bathe, chirping loudly as they spread their wings and fluttered happily. It was as if God had reminded her that every creature was a wonder to behold. "I pray that Isaac and Lily will be happy here, Lord, and that you will help me do what is right for them. Amen." Eleanor felt lighter in her heart as she picked up the basket of laundered shirts. She would make Stella's coffee and perhaps spend the evening reading her Bible, which always provided comfort and inspiration. Suddenly, she heard Fraser and Stella's voices rising in a heated discussion on the veranda, and she shrank back into the shadow of the barn, not wanting to walk into their argument and make it worse. "We don't have any choice. Fraser, I promised they would get their paintings. Too much pressure. They'll just have to wait. Just do what I suggested, and everything will be all right." Eleanor peeked out just as Stella threw her hands up in the air in annoyance and then gestured toward the washing line. "It's what we agreed right from the start. That's the only reason why the rest of her words were lost as two magpies started squabbling loudly in the pine tree. She saw Fraser slowly nod, and then Stella smiled. Clearly, they had reached some sort of compromise or agreement, and Eleanor was reassured when, moments later, she heard a burst of laughter drift toward her in the warm evening air. Stella's moods could change in an instant, which was something she was still getting accustomed to. She straightened her apron and bustled back across the dusty yard, hoping they wouldn't think she had been eavesdropping. "Would you care to sit outside with me on the veranda?" Fraser was waiting for her, and he smiled as he saw Eleanor returning to the log cabin. "I feel as though we've gotten off on the wrong foot, and I want to make amends. I poured you a glass of lemonade." He gestured to the two glasses on the low table between the wicker chairs. Eleanor was pleasantly surprised by his sudden change in demeanor. "That would be nice. And again, I'm sorry about Isaac's behavior. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." Fraser waved her concerns away and pulled the two chairs closer together so they could sit down. He's still young, just finding his way in a new situation. He tweaked his pants at the knee and stretched his legs out. "I'm glad your headache is better." She sipped her lemonade, feeling at a loss for words. She still knew so little about Fraser other than what Stella had told her. And most of her insights were about how he was held in great esteem for his paintings in New York, and that his artistic temperament was to be indulged and nurtured at all times. If anything, Eleanor was quickly discovering that it was Stella whose mercurial moods and demands needed to be indulged. "Our papa was Italian," Fraser remarked, after a moment with a wry smile. It's where I get my artistic talent from, but it's also where Stella gets her hot-headedness from. Folks say that being creative can give a person a fiery temperament, and that's why you may find Stella can be a little intimidating sometimes, but she has a good heart underneath it all. I guess she might be finding it difficult to adapt to having us here, Eleanor replied. Have you had many housekeepers in the past? She had been so busy thinking about her own situation that she had overlooked the fact that Stella was used to being the mistress of the house for her brother. She wondered idly why neither of them had ever married, but didn't like to ask. They tend not to stay long, Fraser chuckled, and there were certainly none who wanted to accompany us all the way out here. It would be a big change from New York. The move has been tiring, and I'm sure this weather is giving me these wretched headaches. He lapsed into silence. This was the first time that Eleanor had been in his company without other people around, and she watched him as he looked at the landscape. Like his sister, Fraser was tall and thin, with a narrow, angular face. His black hair was unfashionably long and flopped over his forehead. He wore a silk scarf tied around his neck like a cravat, even on the hottest day, and he had the soft, slim hands of an artist rather than someone used to working outside. He was not the sort of man she would ever have imagined herself marrying. Her husband, Jacob, had had a barrel chest and broad shoulders, with calloused hands from working on the railroad. But as Stella pointed out, her choices as a widow were limited. I've been thinking about Isaac and Lily asking for the puppy, Fraser said, snapping her out of her musings. He gestured to the grassy fields. Isaac has a point. This land should have animals on it, so perhaps we could start with a dog. Stella will just have to accept it. Maybe we should get a few chickens too, as long as you don't mind looking after them. I wouldn't know where to start. Eleanor's mouth gaped open with surprise. She had convinced herself that Fraser had no backbone and that Stella made all the decisions, but it seemed she'd gotten it wrong. Oh, thank you, Fraser. This will make the children so happy. It really is very kind of you to agree. He shrugged and ran a hand through his dark hair. It's a small price to pay if it helps you settle in. Eleanor finished her lemonade and stood up, remembering that she had forgotten all about Stella's coffee. I'd better make that coffee, I promised Stella. Would you like one as well? Fraser stood up and shook his head. Wait a moment, Eleanor. His voice was low, and he stepped closer, taking her hands in his. There's something else which has been on my mind. His words hung between them, but Eleanor was finding it hard to concentrate. She had hoped that there might be a spark of romance between them, but she couldn't help but wonder why she felt nothing. Yes, what is it? She whispered. The corner of his mouth lifted in a smile, which seemed confident, but his dark eyes darted nervously around. I think the best way to help you feel settled, especially for the sake of the children, is for us to get married. Married? Eleanor gasped. So soon? A shadow crossed Fraser's eyes, but it was gone as soon as she saw it. Why wait? He said cheerfully. I know Stella suggested you could get accustomed to us as our housekeeper first, but I've seen enough to know that I want to make you my wife. He tightened his grip slightly and brushed a dry kiss on her cheek, which took her by surprise. You owe it to Isaac and Lily, don't you think? They need a papa in their lives, and we shall grow fond of each other over time. I know you loved your first husband dearly, but I shall do everything I can to provide for you, Eleanor. Do say yes. She paused for a moment, and then slowly nodded. Yes, Fraser. Thank you. The words sounded hesitant, even to her own ears, but Fraser didn't seem to notice. Wonderful. It's for the best, you'll see, he exclaimed. Now, how about that cup of coffee? I'm going to watch the sunset and get some inspiration for my next painting. Eleanor's head spun as she picked up the basket of laundry again and went inside. Marriage? So soon? It was the last thing she had expected, but it was true. Being wed to Fraser would give the children more security, and that's what she had to remember when her heart felt troubled by the fact she felt nothing for him. Love will come later. She clung to the thought, hoping it was true. Chapter 7. The horses are looking good today, Mr. Mitchell. Morris pumped the handle of the water pump energetically to fill 2 pails so the animals could have a drink before starting the journey back to Cottonwood Creek. I like to look after them well so that they look after me, Hank said. I'd have no business without my horses. He ran a hand down the legs of one of his geldings. The horse had stumbled over some ruts in the road on the way to Willow Brook the previous day, and he wanted to make sure there was no swelling in the tendons. The last thing he needed was for the horse to go lame. Not now that Mayor Hayden was putting plenty of customers his way, and he had gotten a regular schedule of trips running between the two towns. I wish the O'Hanlons felt the same way, Morris muttered. He waited patiently for the horses to drink their fill and then put the pails under the pump, ready to top them up again. Skin and bone, their horses are. They figure if they get 2 years' work out of them, it's good enough, and then it's a bullet in the head out yonder and left for the crows to pick over their carcasses. I guess some folks just don't care. Or maybe I care too much, Hank thought to himself. He knew the O'Hanlon brothers earned much more than he did by working their horses into the ground. In some cases, quite literally. And Wayne had even started hinting that Hank should be doing more trips to add to the ranch's income, saying that he mollycoddled his animals. I checked all their legs already and picked out their hooves, Morris said. I knew you'd want to do it as well, but I figure it's good practice for me. Hank gave Morris an appreciative nod. Uh-huh. It's a good habit to get into. He was a bright boy with a natural way of working with animals. In many ways, Morris reminded him of himself when he was that age. As he hitched his horses into the traces of the stagecoach a few minutes later, his mind wandered over the last few weeks, and his worries gnawed at him again. He and Wayne had been clashing over little things, but it was getting worse. When Wayne remarked that the O'Hanlons were smart to work the way they did, they had argued bitterly about it a few days ago, and Hank had kept himself to himself since. It was hard enough seeing Wayne taking over the family ranch just because he was the eldest son, without having to listen to his misguided opinions on how Hank should be running his stagecoach business as well. Hopefully, Wayne would have gotten over his bad temper by now. Hank was not naturally confrontational, and he had accepted that Wayne was getting the ranch. In fact, he had to admit that Wayne had become more conscientious about work and was making a good go of things now, but lately, his opinionated comments had started grating on him. Maybe it's time for you to get a place of your own, son, his ma had suggested quietly after Wayne had offended Hank again recently and then galloped away to cool off at the saloon. I can't change your pa's mind about Wayne being in charge. It's what he's always wanted, even though I said it wasn't fair on you. It's not that, Ma. It's just, I want to breed horses and break them in. It's what I'm good at, and I'm getting a name for it. Folks will pay good money for my horses, but Wayne is insisting that he wants to use the land for cattle and planting an apple orchard instead. Deborah had patted his arm, but her gaze was troubled. I want you to be happy, Hank. I hope you didn't mind me placing an advertisement in the Matrimonial Times for you. Hank couldn't be cross with his ma. They had always been close, but it had taken him a few days to get over his shock when he discovered that Deborah had engaged the services of Mrs. McKinnon at the Matrimonial Bureau in Cottonwood Creek. She's my friend, and she offered to place the advertisement for such a low price that it would have been rude of me to turn her down, Deborah had explained to her youngest son. But I'm perfectly capable of finding a wife on my own, Ma. Hank had groaned. And preferably someone local who I can get to know first in my own time, rather than meeting a stranger off the train who I've only ever exchanged letters with. Deborah had scoffed, undeterred by his reluctance. Mrs. McKinnon was very reassuring about the whole process, and you'd be amazed at how many of the menfolk around here have gotten married with her help. Even Mayor Hayden did. It was hard for Hank to argue once she mentioned that. Jeff Hayden was a man he admired, so if it had worked for him, he figured he would have to agree. Besides, it was too late to rush to the marriage bureau and cancel the advertisement, his ma had told him rather gleefully. Mrs. McKinnon had placed it that very same day and was hopeful he would receive some replies in no time. And sure enough, just 2 weeks later, he had received his very first reply from a young woman from Boston. He pulled it out of his pocket and read it for the third time in as many hours. Dear Mr. Mitchell, I saw your advertisement in the newspaper and couldn't wait to write back, in the hopes that I'm not too late to be considered. I've never been married, and I work in the new department store on Jackson Street in Boston. It suits me just fine because I simply adore seeing all the fashionable ladies and helping them pick out new outfits. Sometimes I even see them wearing them in the park when I go out on a Sunday afternoon for a walk with my friends. I'm not much of a one for cooking because my ma died when I was still young, but I'm sure I'll figure it out. You say you want someone who is happy to live a quiet life out on a ranch, surrounded by animals. I have to confess, I've always been a little scared of horses, and I've never seen cattle, but my friend Sylvia says it would be a wonderful adventure, and I'm sure you must live close to some stores, as I like shopping very much. I do hope you'll write back, Mr. Mitchell. Yours in anticipation, Gaynor Grady. Something interesting? Morris asked as he suddenly appeared by Hank's side, wiping his hands on an old rag. The horses are ready to go now. Oh no, just a letter is all. Hank stuffed it hastily back in his pocket with a shake of his head. He felt bad for Miss Grady, but he knew he wouldn't be replying to her. A woman who loved to go shopping and stroll around the park looking at fashionable dresses wouldn't last a week on the ranch. He wanted someone who understood his way of life and could be content to sit out and watch the stars come out on a summer's night. Someone who he felt a connection with, who he could share his hopes and dreams with. Someone like the intriguing woman who captured my imagination at the summer fair, he thought, sighing inwardly. Ever since meeting Eleanor, he hadn't been able to get her out of his mind, but although he had kept his eyes peeled whenever he was in Willow Brook, he'd never seen her since. It was as if she had vanished. He was still kicking himself that he hadn't gone back to talk some more with her at the time, while he'd still had a chance. There are quite a few folks waiting for you, by the look of it. Morris shot him a quizzical look. Is everything all right, Mr. Mitchell? You seem a little distracted today. Hank chuckled, rousing himself from his thoughts. Everything's just fine, Morris. My ma's trying to get me married off, and my brother thinks he knows better than me how to raise my horses. But other than that, everything's grand. He jumped up onto the box seat at the front of his stagecoach, where Poppy was already waiting for him, and picked up the reins, clicking his tongue to get the horses walking. See you in a couple of days, he called. Sure will. Morris waved and grabbed a pitchfork to start mucking out the stables before his pa told him off for standing idle. As Hank halted the stagecoach outside the mercantile, he was pleased to see that there were 2 more ladies there than he had anticipated waiting to board his coach. Clearly, the word was getting around about his services. The extra fares would go some way toward keeping Wayne happy, he thought to himself with a rueful smile. Oh, what a darling little dog. One of the women simpered as she spotted Poppy up front on the seat with him. And what a handsome driver, her friend murmured, just loud enough for Hank to hear as she gave him a coy smile. Don't mind Barbara, the First Lady said, rolling her eyes. She already has a fiancé. In fact, she'll be married by this time next week. It never harms to keep Wilfred on his toes. Their good-natured chatter continued as Hank helped each of his passengers into the coach and loaded up their luggage. After spending so many years working on the ranch with just his pa for company, he was slowly getting used to making small talk. I know it's a bit of a tight squeeze, but the journey to Cottonwood Creek isn't too long. A couple of hours, and you'll be able to stretch your legs again. Oh, don't worry about us, Mr. Mitchell, one of his regulars said. She sat demurely in the corner with her reticule on her lap. A little discomfort is more than worth it to help your business. I've been telling everyone how considerate you are when the road is rough. Not like those other fellows who wouldn't care if we arrived black and blue with bruises. Just as Hank was about to climb back up on his seat, there was a sudden commotion further down the street. His breath hitched in his throat as he realized it was Eleanor, and she was running toward him with one hand holding her bonnet in place and the other clutching a parcel. She was still as beautiful as he remembered, with her glossy dark hair and warm brown eyes. Am I too late? She asked breathlessly, coming to a stop in front of him. I need to take this painting to Cottonwood Creek today. Her cheeks were flushed, and she looked equal parts hopeful and apologetic. "It's my own fault I'm in a rush. I was so busy with my chores that time ran away with me. The stagecoach is full, I'm afraid." Hank felt a stab of regret as her face fell with disappointment. "Oh, I'll have to explain to Miss Sanchez." She sounded anxious and bobbed a farewell before turning to walk away. "Well, goodbye. I'll try again another day." "Wait, you can still ride with us." Hank strode after her, determined not to let her slip out of his life again. She turned around again, looking surprised. "But I thought, there's plenty of room up front with me if you don't mind being outside and sharing the seat with my dog, Poppy." His words came out in a rush, and he realized how much he wanted to spend time in her company. She gave him a sudden smile, which lit up her face, making his heart beat a little faster. "That's very kind of you, and a great opportunity for me to have a better view of this lovely landscape." "Are you sure? It's not the most comfortable seat. I don't think Stella would be too worried about me getting shaken around from riding up front, but she sure wouldn't like one of Fraser's pictures up there. This is a framed painting I have to deliver for them, so can you make sure it's put somewhere secure so it doesn't get damaged?" Without further ado, she handed him the parcel. "Of course, and I promise you won't feel in danger. It's all right once you get used to it." "I know we spoke at the summer fair, but we were never properly introduced." She looked up at him through her long, dark eyelashes and smiled again. "I'm Eleanor Brent." Hank lifted his hat. "Hank Mitchell at your service, ma'am. It's nice to meet you again, Mr. Mitchell, and I do appreciate you taking me at such short notice. Please call me Hank." He quickly stowed the parcel away. "I should probably help you up," he added, feeling awkward. The steps up to the box seat were steep, and he could feel the soft curve of her waist under his hand briefly. Eleanor settled her skirts and tied her bonnet a little tighter as Hank jumped up and gathered the reins. "Ready?" He grinned at her, marveling at how adventurous she was. Most women would have demurred, worrying about the dust or getting the sun on their face, but it seemed Eleanor Brent was bolder than most. "I sure am. Let's go," she said, meeting his eyes with a mischievous smile. Poppy yapped with excitement, and the leather harnesses creaked as the horses took up the strain and the stagecoach rolled forward. "Are you still painting?" Hank asked once he had gotten them through the busy main street of Willow Brook and out into the countryside. "I was very taken with your exhibition, and by the look of how many folks wanted to purchase your paintings, I wasn't the only one." Eleanor blushed slightly at his compliment, and then shook her head. "I'm not spending as much time as I used to doing my paintings now," she explained. "My situation has changed somewhat." She glanced sideways toward him, as though she was weighing up whether to tell him more. "I was widowed a few years ago, and I have 6-year-old twins. My sister and her husband were very kind, letting us live on their ranch since I came west with her. But it was time for me to make some changes and provide more security for my children." "That's a shame," Hank said. He realized his comment could be misconstrued and hastily continued. "I mean, it's a shame you aren't doing as much painting, although wanting the best for your children is admirable," he added. "Do you have children?" Eleanor's question was casual. This time it was Hank's turn to shake his head, and he sighed with a tinge of regret. "No, although I hope to one day. I figured I would have been settled down with a family of my own by now, but I got busy running the family ranch, and the right woman never seemed to cross my path. I guess there aren't many single ladies out here." Eleanor's open expression and the warmth of curiosity in her eyes encouraged him to carry on talking. Before he knew what was happening, he found all his frustrations about the situation at home pouring out of him. "What I really want to do is breed my own horses and break them in," he concluded, after explaining about Wayne's return to the ranch and his disappointment that his pa had favored Wayne to take over from him. "The problem is that Wayne doesn't want me to use any of our land for raising my horses. He wants it all for the cattle and to pursue his ideas. It must be hard after devoting yourself to the place while your brother was away." Eleanor sounded sympathetic, and Hank realized this was the first time he had really shared his dreams for the future with anyone. "It took me a while to get over losing my husband, Jacob," she continued. I know it's not the same, but my sister, Imogen, always tells me that we shouldn't live in the past. Perhaps your brother taking over the ranch is a blessing in disguise? This might be the time to take a new direction and strike out on your own. Hank fell silent for a moment as he negotiated a rough patch of road, mulling over what she had said. So, has she persuaded you to do the same? Are you taking a new direction in your life? He blurted out. He could have kicked himself, as a shadow of worry crossed Eleanor's face. What he really wanted to ask was whether she was courting someone, but he didn't have the courage to do so. I suppose you could say I am, she replied slowly. Imogen persuaded me to visit the matrimonial agency in Cottonwood Creek. 2 hearts entwined? Your sister sounds a lot like my ma, Hank laughed, pleased that they had something in common. She placed an advertisement to help me find a wife, and only told me afterward. I reckon Imogen would have done the same, except I told her not to. She grabbed his arm as the stagecoach suddenly lurched over a deep rut, before quickly sliding a little further away on the seat, looking embarrassed. I guess it's only natural that your ma doesn't want you to be lonesome. It worked for your sister and Jeff Hayden, didn't it? I think it was seeing such a respected man as him, having success with placing an advertisement for a mail-order bride, that convinced her I should do it as well. It seems our families are determined for us to find love, Eleanor murmured. It was when I was at Mrs. McKinnon's office that we met Miss Sanchez, and now I'm working as a housekeeper for her brother, Fraser Sanchez. They came west for his health and for him to paint the landscape. Until Mrs. McKinnon helps you find a husband, you mean? Hank wondered whether he had been over-familiar, as Eleanor suddenly looked away. If only I'd known she was still in Willow Brook. If only I'd had the courage to speak to her more at the summer fair, he thought to himself. But then he reminded himself again that a cultured woman like her would never be interested in someone who drove a stagecoach and wanted to breed horses for a living. Actually, Fraser proposed to me, Eleanor said quietly. She sounded puzzled, as though it had been a surprise, and she was still trying to get used to the idea. So you're to be wed? Congratulations. Hank forced himself to smile as an icy band of disappointment gripped his heart. He had never felt such an instant attraction to a woman, the way he had with Eleanor, and had barely been able to get her out of his mind ever since their chance meeting at the summer fair. But now she was committed to marrying another man, and he felt regret curdling in his stomach. Being in her company had sparked a longing within him that he had never realized was missing until he had met her. Until now, work had been enough, and he had resigned himself to the fact that loneliness was the price of doing the right thing for the family ranch. And now that I've met a woman who has made me feel differently, it's too late. He gritted his teeth and wondered whether he had been foolish to think there could be anything between them. They scarcely knew each other, but he couldn't deny the tug of connection he felt toward her, and perhaps she had felt it too. He wanted to ask, but he had missed his chance. He would just have to keep his feelings to himself. Thank you, Eleanor said. She smiled, but the sparkle had gone out of her eyes. They clouded with an emotion Hank couldn't quite name. She ruffled Poppy's head, avoiding his gaze. The only trouble with Fraser's proposal is that I'm not sure how genuine it was, she added under her breath with a troubled sigh. Her voice was so low it was as if she was speaking to herself. Hank's heart jumped with hope again. What makes you say that? He knew he was being forward, but he had to know. Could I still be in with a chance? She was seeking a husband, and he was seeking a wife. Could something blossom between him and Eleanor, he wondered. She shrugged, looking suddenly uncomfortable with the way the conversation was going. It's just, I always hoped I'd marry again for love. But Stella seems more concerned with my helping Fraser complete some of his paintings than us spending time together to arrange the wedding. So you haven't booked the pastor yet? What? Oh, no, not yet. She sounded startled, as though she hadn't meant to divulge so much, and hastily looked out across the horizon again. I'm just being silly, worrying about nothing, she added a moment later. As Fraser said, I owe it to my children to give them the security of being married again. Love will come in its own good time. But it's not right to marry if there's no love, Eleanor. You deserve more." The words were on the tip of Hank's tongue, and he wanted to urge her to reconsider. But before he had the opportunity to say it, the first few buildings of Cottonwood Creek came into sight, and he knew he had missed his chance. "I guess he wouldn't have proposed if he didn't love you," he said lamely, with another stab of regret. "Of course." Eleanor brightened as they came into town and retied her bonnet ribbons, patting her hair into place. "You'll have to forgive me for chattering on about things that are of no concern to you." She shot him a smile. "My brother-in-law, Mayor Hayden, said that your stagecoach business is the best in the area, so I shall have to tell him that I agree. And I wish you luck with whatever you decide to do about breeding horses. Perhaps the perfect block of land will come up, and before you know it, you'll be happily married to your mail-order bride, just as your ma hopes for you." Hank steadied the horses as the road got busy with wagons passing in the opposite direction. The moment of intimacy had passed. "I appreciate your kind words, and good luck with your wedding to Mr. Sanchez." A moment later, he had pulled the horses to a halt in the center of Cottonwood Creek, and everyone was disembarking to go about their errands. As he watched Eleanor hurry away, he hoped that they could remain friends, if nothing more. There was something about her easy company and sunny demeanor that made him forget about his troubles and feel somehow hopeful for the future. Fraser Sanchez was a lucky man to have captured her heart, and he hoped he would treat Eleanor and her children well. Chapter 8. "I'll come and visit real soon," Eleanor called. She rushed forward to Jeff's wagon to give Isaac and Lily one last kiss. "You be sure and look after little Bluey, and do as your Aunt Imogen tells you." The puppy wriggled excitedly in the basket between the two children, and she wished they weren't going. "They're going to have a lovely time with us," Mervyn said, shooting Eleanor a reassuring smile. "We'll be fishing at the river, going horseback riding, and they can help feed the calves and collect the eggs. It will be just like old times." Eleanor nodded, swallowing down the lump that had formed in her throat. Fraser's headaches had gotten worse in the last week, and although almost a month had passed since Fraser had agreed they could get a dog, Stella had not hidden her dislike of the new puppy, even though Isaac and Lily did their best to keep her out of Stella's way. It had gotten to the point where it felt as though everything Eleanor and the children did was wrong. So, when Imogen and Jeff had stopped to chat with her after church on Sunday and suggested that the children might like to spend a couple of weeks back at the ranch, she had jumped at the chance. "Bye, Ma. We love you." Lily looked as though she might cry until Mervyn handed her one of the reins so that she could help him drive the wagon. "You'll come and visit us, won't you?" Isaac called over his shoulder. "Of course. Just as soon as I have a break between my chores. I know you'll have a lovely time back with all the animals." Eleanor felt mixed emotions as she watched the wagon roll away with her children. The fact that Fraser and Stella seemed to find Isaac and Lily too noisy and too exuberant, even when they were being well-behaved, was giving her terrible misgivings about her forthcoming marriage to Fraser. Yet again, she found herself wondering if she was doing the right thing. She had always known it would be hard for the children to accept a new papa in their lives when she remarried, but oftentimes it felt as though Stella, in particular, was irritated by their presence. She knew that Stella would not be living with them come spring, but Fraser often barely registered that the children were there, let alone bothered to show any interest in them. It was such a contrast from how they had been treated when they still lived with her sister and Jeff that Eleanor didn't know how to make it better. Sending the children to stay back at High Bluff Ranch for a few weeks was a short-term solution, but her heart ached at the thought that Fraser might never be fond of them. "Have they gone yet?" Stella demanded from the veranda. "There's plenty to be getting on with instead of standing and watching them leave." Eleanor sighed and turned to walk back into the cabin. Stella's lips were pinched together in a thin, disapproving line, as though she couldn't care less about whether Eleanor might miss the children. "I need to prepare lunch, and then I thought I'd make a start on weeding the garden," she said wearily. "Could you bring me a cold compress for my head?" Fraser sounded querulous from where he was lying on the daybed in his studio. Before Eleanor had a chance to reply, Stella threw the door open to what had been the parlor, but which now served as the room where Fraser did his painting. "We don't have time for you to have another headache," she said sharply. "You said you would work on your new painting, but it looks as though you haven't even touched it for the last few days." Eleanor slipped into the room behind her, carrying a jug of cool water and a clean cloth. She poured the water into a bowl, swirled the cloth in it, then squeezed the water out and laid it gently on his forehead. "How can you expect him to paint if he's not feeling well?" "It's all very well for you to say that, but you don't understand," Stella cried. Fraser winced at the screeching pitch of her voice. "She's right, Stella," he muttered. "Mr. Davis will just have to wait. It's this wretched, humid weather. I can't seem to get better, no matter how much I rest." Stella paced back and forth, her heels clacking loudly on the wooden floorboards, with no regard for her brother. "I promised Mr. Davis that the painting would be finished by the end of this month. He's our wealthiest patron, and if you don't finish it on time, he might back out of the agreement." Eleanor glanced around the studio. It was the first time she had been in there for a while, and it was true what Stella had said. It looked as though Fraser hadn't produced any work lately. In fact, even calling it a studio seemed generous. Other than the small painting she had taken into Cottonwood Creek with Hank, there was no evidence of any artistic endeavors apart from a rough sketch on a canvas against the far wall. Fraser groaned with annoyance. Doesn't the man understand that creativity cannot be rushed? He struggled to sit up on the chaise longue and glanced toward the sketch. It was a view of the distant mountains from where their land adjoined the river. It was one of the best views from Maple Tree Ranch, in Eleanor's opinion. Stella's expression hardened. "I'm not going to let Mr. Davis down. It took me months of effort in New York trying to get him interested in your paintings. All those boring soirees I had to attend and tedious luncheons listening to folks who know nothing about art. I suppose there's the other option that we talked about." Fraser's eyes flicked toward Eleanor, and Stella nodded firmly. "We have no choice. That's what we'll do," she announced. "What will you do?" Eleanor asked. She wondered why they were both staring at her expectantly. "You'll have to paint it for him," Stella said. "Ever since I first saw your painting at the Matrimonial Bureau in Cottonwood Creek that time we met, I was surprised by how similar your style is to Fraser's. If you paint it carefully, I'm sure Mr. Davis will never know the difference." Eleanor's mouth gaped open in surprise. "Now, just a minute," she started. "I only agreed to add a few finishing touches to that last picture of Fraser's because he wasn't feeling well, but you're surely not serious about me doing an entire painting from scratch?" "We wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate," Fraser said urgently. He gave her a beseeching look and pressed the back of his hand against his forehead to remind her how much pain he was in. "Stella has worked so hard to promote my reputation in New York, and it just so happens that the art dealer who Mr. Davis trusts will be in Cottonwood Creek soon. If you could do the painting and deliver it to him, we would be so grateful. But quite aside from the fact that it is immoral to try and pass my work off as yours, in fact, it's fraudulent. I don't think I would be able to. I'm not a professional artist, as you know." Eleanor could feel frustration rising in her chest, but she tried to keep it in check. "If you cared anything for Fraser, you would agree to do what we're asking." Stella took a deep breath and gave Eleanor a persuasive smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Fraser has agreed to marry you and take on your children, where many men wouldn't even give you a second look. It's a small thing to do in return for my brother's generosity. It would just be this once," she added. "I've seen your paintings," Fraser continued. "You're better than you think you are, Eleanor. The thing is, in the future, we could probably arrange for you to sell your own paintings under your own name, but just for now, you would have to pretend it was my work. I'm only suggesting it so that Mr. Davis pays for the picture I promised him. If you think about it, it's all for Isaac and Lily's benefit, really. It will help me be able to give them a roof over their heads once we get married. One painting would pay for a whole year's rent for this ranch." His words hung in the air, and he glanced toward Stella again. Eleanor walked to the window, wrestling with her conscience. If she didn't agree to help, Fraser might insist that they had to live in New York after they got married, which would mean leaving all her family and friends behind, just when Isaac and Lily had gotten used to living in Montana. But what about the fact that it's deceitful? She wondered how she would be able to sit in church every Sunday, knowing that she had helped Fraser perpetuate a lie. All the great artists had students who created some of their works for them, Stella said airily. Don't forget, my brother and I will help you sell your paintings as well, once you have done this for us. She patted Eleanor on the shoulder as though her agreement was a foregone conclusion. We're practically family now, she continued. If you look after us, we will look after you and the children. I suppose I could give it a try, Eleanor said hesitantly. Are you sure I won't get into trouble with the sheriff? I can't do anything that might put Isaac and Lily at risk. Don't worry about that, Fraser reassured her. He relaxed back onto the daybed with a contented sigh. Stella will make sure everything goes smoothly. All you have to do is concentrate on painting the picture. You may as well start now, Stella said in a tone that brooked no disagreement. There was a steely glint in her eye as she gestured toward the canvas and the array of paintbrushes. I can take care of your chores for a few hours. Getting this picture painted is the most important thing. It's probably best that you don't take any time away from the ranch until it's finished. Eleanor nodded mutely, thinking about her promise to visit Isaac and Lily. Her mind whirled with conflicting thoughts and emotions about what she was about to embark upon. She had never done anything dishonest in her entire life, and this venture went against everything she believed in as an artist. Despite her reservations, she decided to paint this one picture for Stella and Fraser. Afterward, she would tell them she could never do it again. As Stella strolled away, looking triumphant, and Fraser dozed off again, Eleanor took a deep breath, picked up a paintbrush, and began to channel her emotions into the picture. All she could hope for was that Mr. Davis would like it and that they wouldn't get found out. With a heavy heart, she started to lay down the first wash of color and prayed that somehow the Lord would forgive her for agreeing to do something she knew was so wrong. Chapter 9. Eleanor pushed back a lock of hair from her forehead and felt a surge of relief wash over her as she added the final touches to the painting. She had toiled day and night for over a week, stopping only to snatch a few hours of sleep each night and eat. But now, it was done. Let me just sign my name in the corner. Fraser's voice behind her made her jump. She had been so engrossed in painting. It's pretty good, Fraser said. While his tone was not exactly complimentary, it did give Eleanor a certain sense of satisfaction. Are you sure it's a good enough likeness to how you would have painted it? She asked. She swirled the brush in water to clean it and then laid it down before wiping her hands on her apron. I don't think he'll ever know the difference. Fraser bent over and added his trademark signature with a flourish in dark paint, before standing up again with a happy nod. He took several paces backward and looked at the painting through narrowed eyes. This has worked well, he said, but it won't happen again, will it? Eleanor felt a shiver of anxiety as she saw a shifty look flicker in Fraser's eyes. It was what she had been dreading. If she was able to create a convincing reproduction of Fraser's paintings, what incentive would there ever be for them to allow her to do her own paintings to sell under her own name? We can decide that later, Stella said, bustling into the room. She exchanged a look with Fraser, and Eleanor's heart sank as she realized what their plan had been all along. We agreed it would be just this one time, Eleanor said firmly. She knew she had to stand her ground. Even though she had never imagined that selling her own paintings would be possible, the summer fair had shown her that folks liked her work. I'm sure when we're married, you won't mind helping me out now and again, Fraser said. He came closer to Eleanor to slip his hand around her waist, and it was all she could do not to pull away. I don't mind helping you a little, she murmured, but surely you want to paint your own pictures? You are an artist, after all. It's what you love doing. Fraser mumbled a reply she didn't quite catch. It hasn't been easy for us since Fraser started getting these headaches, Stella said. She tucked her hand into Fraser's arm with a possessive air. "My brother deserves your help, Eleanor. You have to understand that, although he's talented, he gets tired easily. So what if you do some more of his paintings? It will be worth it to keep the great name of Fraser Sanchez on everyone's lips back in New York. He's marrying me just to keep his own flagging professional reputation going." The thought settled in Eleanor's mind like a steel trap snapping closed. This had been Stella's plan right from the start, and once she was married to Fraser, she would have to do his bidding or risk being thrown out with her honor ruined as a spurned wife. "If that's everything, I'd like to go to bed now and then visit Isaac and Lily tomorrow," Eleanor said stiffly. "Your visit to your sister's ranch will have to wait." Stella folded her arms and tapped her foot impatiently. "The painting has to be delivered to the art dealer in Cottonwood Creek as a matter of urgency." A distant rumble of thunder made Eleanor look out of the window. Storm clouds had been rolling across the horizon for the last few days, making the air feel oppressive, but now she could see they were creeping closer. "Are you sure? It looks like we might be in for bad weather." Stella shrugged as though it was of no consequence. "I'm sure you'll be fine. You can go to Cottonwood Creek on one of the horses first thing in the morning. It's vital that you deliver the painting before the train leaves to head east so he can take it to Mr. Davis." "I think I'm going to celebrate with a bottle of claret tonight," Fraser declared. "I'll wrap the painting up this evening so it's ready for you to take to town. Meanwhile, you'd better get on with making dinner, Eleanor. You're a better cook than Stella, and I sure have missed your cornbread and boiled ham." "Yes, Fraser's right. You're better than me at all the chores." Stella gave a tinkling laugh and swept out of the room with her brother, leaving Eleanor simmering with resentment. It had become patently clear that her marriage to Fraser was never going to be for love. It was for convenience, to deceive folks by passing off her paintings as Fraser's, and to do all the household chores in between. But even with this stark realization, Eleanor felt tears prick the back of her eyes as she thought about having to go back to Imogen and Jeff and tell them that her relationship with Fraser was nothing more than a sham and that she had made a terrible mistake. "What will everyone think of me?" She sighed as she started peeling the vegetables to go with the boiled ham. A sudden image of Hank Mitchell floated into her mind again, and she wished with all her heart that she could marry a kind-hearted gentleman like him instead. Even though they had only met 2 times, there was something about the way that Hank cared about her opinion and how he had confided in her about his own dreams for the future, which tugged at her emotions. Not to mention the way that her heart beat a little faster every time he had turned his inquisitive blue-eyed gaze on her, and the way his hand had felt so strong on her waist when she'd climbed onto the seat of his stagecoach. Eleanor sighed again. She was engaged to be wed to a man who cared nothing for her other than how useful she would be to his career. And her heart was hankering after someone completely different, a rugged, honest man of the land who was already looking elsewhere for a bride. How had her life gotten so complicated, she wondered? And could she really go ahead and marry for convenience? She didn't know the answer, and her prayers had so far failed to show her the path God might want her to take. The following morning, Eleanor felt a shiver of apprehension trickle down her back as she stood on the veranda, looking across the landscape. The horses were trotting restlessly back and forth along the fence in the paddock, their ears laid flat. Even with her limited knowledge of animals, Eleanor knew this was not a good sign. "The horses look pretty nervous," she said to Fraser as he came out to join her. "I think the thunder is making them scared." As if to underline her point, one of them reared, rolling his eyes in fear. Fraser scratched his chin, deep in thought. "The trouble is, I know that the art dealer isn't staying in Cottonwood Creek. Even if there is a storm, I expect the train will still run. If we miss getting this painting to him, it's not going to look good." The door slammed behind them, snatched on a sudden gust of wind from Stella's hand. Even she had the grace to look a little startled at the strength of the wind. "You said Jeff taught you how to ride, right?" She eyed the prancing horses and frowned. "Yes, he did," Eleanor said, "but not in conditions like this." Well, what are we going to do then? Stella crossed her arms, glaring at Eleanor as if the storm was somehow her fault. If you leave now, you'll probably be fine. Eleanor looked toward Fraser, wondering when he would step in and call off this ridiculous plan. I'd hate to think of Eleanor having an accident if the thunder gets worse, he mumbled half-heartedly. Do you think the stagecoach might be running? Eleanor gestured toward the dusty road at the end of the ranch track. I've been standing here for a while, and I haven't seen any wagons going through. I think folks are probably waiting for the storm to pass. That would be the sensible thing to do, she added. This is ridiculous, Stella said. For all we know, the storm might pass around us or come to nothing. There have been rumbles of thunder for several days already, and it doesn't seem to be changing. I propose you should saddle up and make the best of it. Eleanor had gotten to know Stella well enough by now to recognize the stubborn set of her jaw when her mind was made up about something. If you help me get the horse ready, I'll do my best to get to Willow Brook. That's a good start, Fraser said. He gave her a grateful smile. At least, if you can do that, you might be able to get on the stagecoach, or see if someone will ride with you onward to Cottonwood Creek. Stella yanked her bonnet on and tied it tightly under her chin. Come along, then, she snapped, striding toward the horses. I really do think you're making a fuss about nothing. 10 minutes later, Eleanor had the satisfaction of knowing that she had been right to say it was too dangerous. She and Stella had been unable even to catch the horses, let alone saddle one of them. As the wind whipped across the land, the horses kicked up their hooves, bucking and rearing, before galloping away every time they tried to get a rope around their necks. It's no use, Eleanor cried. We'll have to write a letter to Mr. Davis explaining what happened. He's reasonable enough to understand that we've done our best, surely? Stella's face was red with exertion, and she slammed the gate to the field shut in a fit of temper, making the horses even more nervous as they pranced away, with their tails held high, showing the whites of their eyes. Suddenly, in the distance, a cloud of dust rose into the air. There's someone on the road. Stella grabbed Eleanor's wrist and the picture and started running down the track. It looks like a wagon or buggy. Whatever. It doesn't matter. We'll wave them down and plead for them to take you to Willow Brook. Eleanor had no choice but to pick up her skirts and follow Stella. Frankly, she was feeling so dispirited about her situation that a few days away from Maple Tree Ranch was starting to feel tempting, no matter who she traveled with. Folks were friendly, and she hoped it might be someone local. Will you stop and help us? Stella ran ahead of Eleanor, determined not to let the buggy pass the turning to their ranch. She waved her handkerchief in the air, not realizing that it might scare the horse pulling the buggy. The gentleman holding the reins had his hat pulled down low against the wind. Whoa there, he called, reassuring the horse as Stella jumped up and down. How can I help you, ma'am? The deep voice was familiar, and when the man tipped his hat back, Eleanor's heart skipped a beat as she realized it was Hank Mitchell. It's you. The words left her mouth before she could stop them. Sorry, I didn't recognize you in this buggy. I've only ever seen you in the stagecoach with all 4 horses. Now he had come to a stop. She saw that the buggy was being pulled by one of the strawberry roan geldings, but she hadn't put 2 and 2 together. Do you know him? Stella's glance between the two of them was sharply suspicious. Nice to meet you, Hank said easily. You must be Miss Sanchez. I'm Hank Mitchell, and I've taken Mrs. Brent on my stagecoach once, that's all. I see. Stella's eyes narrowed, but then she remembered she needed his help, and this would likely work in her favor. We desperately need to get dear Eleanor to Cottonwood Creek, she said, turning on the charm. My brother is a renowned artist, and there's an art dealer there waiting for us to deliver a painting. If he leaves on the train without it, it could cause no end of problems. We've been trying to catch the horses, but they're behaving very badly. She gave Hank a winsome smile and fluttered her eyelashes slightly. Eleanor was shocked to feel a dart of something akin to jealousy at the way Stella was flirting so openly to get her own way. So you'd like me to take Mrs. Brent in my buggy? Hank raised one eyebrow. It must be mighty important if you even considered that she could ride alone, Miss Sanchez. I can tell you're not too familiar with how fast a storm can roll in across these mountains. It would be far too dangerous, even for someone as capable as Mrs. Brent. 2 spots of red appeared on Stella's cheeks at the veiled insinuation that she would happily have put Eleanor in harm's way. Naturally, we care a great deal for Eleanor, she said hastily. We could wait, but Fraser doesn't like to let our wealthy patrons down. He'll pay you handsomely if you can take Eleanor to Cottonwood Creek today so she can deliver this painting in time. She eyed Poppy, who was sitting on the buggy seat next to Hank, with a sniff of distaste. Anything to help a friend of Mrs. Brent's, Hank said, with a twinkle in his eye. He climbed out of the buggy and helped Eleanor up onto the seat before carefully stowing the painting in the back, where it would be safe from the wind and rain. Maybe you could stay at the boarding house in Cottonwood Creek for a night or two if the storm does head this way, Stella suggested to Eleanor. Just tell them Fraser will pay for it next time we're in town. Now that she had gotten her way, she could afford to be pleasant again, although Eleanor couldn't help but wonder how much of it was to impress Hank, rather than for any real concern for her. Don't worry, I'll make sure Mrs. Brent is safe. Hank jumped back into the buggy and flicked the reins over the horse's back as Poppy sat eagerly between them, giving a little yap of excitement. Good day to you, Miss Sanchez. If the storm does head this way, be sure to secure your cabin doors and windows and wait for it to blow over. He tipped his hat and grinned. It should give your brother plenty of inspiration for some paintings, if nothing else. As the buggy bowled along, Eleanor sat back in the seat, feeling strangely comforted by the fact that Hank had said he would take care of her. She realized with a start that only one other man had ever made her feel the same way, and that had been Jacob, her late husband. She stole a glance sideways, and a flush rose up her cheeks as she saw that Hank was looking at her. I'm not sure that the Sanchez family has your best interests at heart, he said, in the forthright manner she was becoming accustomed to from him. What sort of man would send his fiancée out alone when there's a storm brewing? The sort of man who cares more about his reputation as an artist than anything else? And doing his sister's bidding, Eleanor murmured. Now that Hank had said it so bluntly, she knew that Fraser would never care for her in the way she yearned for. A sudden thought slid into her mind, which shocked her. I don't owe it to Isaac and Lily to marry Fraser for convenience. I owe it to them to hold out for true love, and for a man who will care for my children as though they were his own. She felt as though a weight had lifted from her shoulders and smiled to herself. As soon as she returned to Maple Tree Ranch, she would tell Fraser the engagement was off. Looks like the storm's getting closer, Hank said, jerking his head toward the glowering black clouds, which seemed to have sprung up from nowhere. The sky lit up as jagged lightning arced across the landscape, and a deluge of rain started thrumming on the canvas roof of the buggy. Hold tight, this is going to be an interesting journey, he added, raising his voice to make himself heard over the roaring wind. Will we be all right? Should we stop and turn around? Eleanor knew she sounded panicky. I'll never hear the end of it if I don't deliver this painting. Stella will be so angry, and it will be all my fault, of course. Hank shook his head. We'll carry on for as long as we can. He held her gaze for a moment. You don't deserve to be treated like Miss Sanchez treats you, he said firmly. I'll do whatever I can, but I want you to know it's to help you, Eleanor, not Miss Sanchez or her brother. She felt a warm glow in her heart. Thank you. The coziness of being cocooned in the buggy with Hank as the storm raged made her feel as though she could finally speak what was on her mind. I'm calling off my engagement, she blurted out. Fraser Sanchez only wanted me for how I could help with his paintings. My sister, Imogen, always said we could live back at High Bluff Ranch, so that's what I shall do. Just as soon as I've taken care of this one last thing for them. Before Hank could reply, the deafening noise of something Eleanor had never heard before filled the air, and the horse shuddered to a halt in front of the buggy. Poppy growled and turned her brown eyes to Eleanor with her tail tucked between her legs. Look out, Hank cried. There's a flood coming down the mountain, and it's headed right for us. Chapter 10. Eleanor was shocked by the speed of the roaring flood that suddenly engulfed them. The torrent of water crossing the road was full of boulders and broken branches from the woods higher up the side of the mountain. "Are we going to get swept away?" Eleanor cried. She grabbed onto Hank's arm as the water swirled all around them. "I don't know, but I won't let you come to any harm." Hank's jaw was set firm with grim determination, and he leaned forward in his seat to try to control Prince. The horse threw his head up and then started rearing, slashing the air with his front hooves and whinnying in terror. "Whoa there, boy. Calm down." Hank's masterful voice seemed to bring the horse to his senses, and although he jumped nervously within the traces of the buggy harness, he stopped rearing. Another jagged shaft of lightning ripped across the sky, accompanied by a sudden clap of thunder. Eleanor had never known rain so heavy. The road, which had been dusty moments before, had turned to thick mud in an instant. The deluge of water swirled and foamed, trapping them on every side, and she could tell by the frown on Hank's face that it was about to get worse. "Do you trust me, Eleanor?" Hank's voice was urgent but firm. "I can get us out of this, but you have to trust that I know what I'm doing." Eleanor locked her eyes with his and nodded. "You've been nothing but kind to me ever since we met. Yes, Hank, I trust you with my life. Just tell me what I need to do, or how I can help." Suddenly, the buggy started tipping sideways beneath them. The strength of the water was lifting the wheels off the ground, and Eleanor knew they didn't have long. If they didn't get themselves out of the situation immediately, the water would be too deep for them to attempt to wade out of it, and they would be trapped in the buggy and swept away into the river. Hank stood up in the buggy seat and held his hand out to her. "I'm going to walk along the shafts of the buggy and lift you onto Prince's back. Don't worry about him rearing. He won't do it again. I've trained this horse since he was a tiny foal, and he'll do what we want. Once I know you're secure, I'm going to sit on Prince as well, and then I'll release the buggy." Eleanor nodded, too anxious to speak. Fixing her gaze on Hank's reassuringly strong shoulders, she stood up from her seat as well. Her legs were shaking as the buggy jerked and bucked beneath her, as though it had a life of its own. Where it had felt sturdy before, now it felt as flimsy as a child's toy, and she wondered whether they could survive this. She clutched Poppy to her chest, hoping that the dog wouldn't try and jump out of her arms. "Give me your hand," Hank commanded. He was standing straddled on the traces, with his knees slightly bent to brace himself against the unpredictable motion as the water rose even higher. Eleanor reached out with her spare hand and felt reassured by his warm, strong grip. "Step over the front of the buggy and stand on the traces with me," Hank said. "I've got you, Eleanor. Remember that." The next moments passed in a blur. 1 minute, Eleanor was standing in the buggy. The next, she felt Hank grasp her waist and swing her around so that she was sitting on Prince's broad back. She threaded her fingers through the horse's mane and clung on for dear life while still holding on to the terrier. "Sit tight. I'll be right behind you. I won't let you fall off, but we have to give Prince his head if he's to get us out safely." Hank's instructions came in gasps as he wrestled to try to stop the buggy from flipping over. That would have been fatal for all of them. Lord, please save us. Please give Hank the strength to make this work. Eleanor clung to Prince even tighter as the prayer was torn from her lips by the howling wind. She was already soaked to the skin by the torrential rain, and the floodwater sucked at her legs, rising higher and higher at an alarming speed, the like of which she had never seen in her whole life. Suddenly, she felt Hank's broad chest against her back, and he held her tightly against him with one arm. In his other hand, she saw a flash of silver as he drew a knife from its leather sheath. He brought it down in short, sharp, decisive swipes, cutting the leather harness that held Prince in the buggy traces, and then slashing through the long reins to make them more manageable. "Go on, Prince. Do what you need." Hank's shout was kind but masterful, and the horse plowed forward through the water, suddenly free from the buggy. Half swimming, half walking, the plucky horse dragged himself through the water with them on his back, straining every sinew. "Come on, Prince. You can do it," Eleanor whispered, leaning low over his muscular neck. Her heart jolted with fright every time they were swept sideways, but each time it happened, Hank tightened his grasp around her waist and spoke calmly to his horse again. "Good boy, Prince. We're getting there." The horse scrabbled and lunged, snorting violently as rocks and branches slapped against them. "It's working," Eleanor cried as she realized they were emerging on the far side of the flood. The height of the water receded down her legs until she could see her feet again. Hank kicked his heels against Prince's flanks, and the horse gave 3 mighty leaps to finally get clear of the raging debris-strewn torrent. "Keep going, boy," Hank urged. The horse loped onward, up onto a grassy bank. It was only once they were there that Hank allowed Prince to stop. He reined him around, and they looked back at the wide, frothing river of water cascading down the mountainside behind them. The rain was still lashing down, and Eleanor's hair fell in wet strands over her eyes. She pushed it aside just in time to see the buggy roll upside down in the water and smash into smithereens as it was dragged over a submerged rocky outcrop. "Oh, no! Your buggy, Hank! You've lost it!" "Never mind," Hank said with a low chuckle from behind her. His voice was deep, and his breath tickled in her ear, making her stomach flip with a strange sensation. "It's just wood and canvas, which can be replaced. What matters is that we got out safely." A violent shiver gripped Eleanor as she realized how close they had been to losing their lives. If it hadn't been for Hank's cool head and Prince's bravery, they would have been swept away to a watery death. She was sure of it. "There's an old barn just up ahead," Hank said, gathering up what was left of the reins again. "We'll shelter there until the storm is over, and I'll see if I can get a fire going to warm you up." Eleanor nodded, suddenly unable to speak as her teeth started chattering from the shock of it all. She leaned back against Hank's reassuring bulk and closed her eyes as Prince trotted onward, taking them to shelter and safety. "Looks like we're not the first folks to have taken shelter here," Hank commented as he pushed open the creaking barn door. There was a scuffling sound as Poppy darted ahead of them, with her tail wagging, sending mice scurrying away, but Eleanor was beyond worrying about that. Although the roof was letting in water at one end, at least half of the barn was dry. He hitched Prince to an old stall and smiled when he realized there was even some hay in the feed rack for him. It smelled a little musty, but it would be better than nothing. "Whoever's been here before already gathered some firewood." Eleanor pointed to a stack of sticks in the corner and sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. Although it wasn't cold, she felt weary to her bones, and the thought of having a fire was comforting. "It's our lucky day." He eyed the dusty barn floor and kicked some old rocks into a rough circle before quickly snapping the sticks to make them shorter and laying them in a crisscross fashion so the air could draw. He pulled some matches out of his shirt pocket, which were miraculously still dry, and grabbed a handful of the hay. Within a couple of minutes, a small fire was crackling merrily in the center of the barn, throwing off enough heat for the steam to start rising from Eleanor's sodden skirts. "This barn sure is cozy. If it weren't for us nearly being swept away to get here, it could almost be rustic enough for me to capture it in a painting sometime," she said with a wry smile. She picked up an old rake from the corner of the barn and cleared the area around the fire to make sure that no sparks could catch and inadvertently set fire to the place. "I'm sorry, I couldn't save the painting," Hank said. He wandered back to the barn doorway, looking out at the rain. In the distance, the sky was starting to brighten slightly as the leaden gray clouds rolled west, leaving better weather to come behind them. Eleanor shook her skirts out and stretched her hands in front of the flames, enjoying the warmth. Her shock was starting to recede, and she tilted her chin defiantly. "I'm not sorry. It's a blessing in disguise that the painting has been destroyed." Hank's eyes widened with surprise. "You're glad it's gone? I don't understand. Stella was willing to put you in great danger to get that painting to Cottonwood Creek before the train left." After what they had just been through, Eleanor knew she had to tell Hank everything. She took a deep breath and began. "Fraser didn't paint that picture. I did," she confessed. "Fraser hasn't been very well, and Stella insisted that I had to complete the painting, but allow him to sign it." Hank nodded slowly, but his expression was hard to read. I had a feeling Miss Sanchez was a forceful sort of woman who's used to getting her own way. I agreed to do it because they said I owed it to them, what with Fraser offering to marry me and provide for Isaac and Lily. What I did was deceitful, and I felt terrible for agreeing. But I did it nonetheless, much to my shame. She looked up through her lashes at Hank, expecting to see disappointment in his blue eyes at her actions, or even revulsion that she could have agreed to do something so dishonest. I knew there was something about her that didn't sit right with me, Hank growled. He shook his head in disgust, but it was not directed at her. They put you in a terrible position, Eleanor. You mustn't blame yourself. For what it's worth, I told them that I would only do it this one time. In fact, Fraser said that after we had delivered the painting to their wealthy patron in New York, he would try to help me sell some more of my own paintings through the high society friends and acquaintances that Stella has in New York. He did? That sounds a lot like bribery to me. Eleanor felt startled at the bald statement, but then she realized it was true. Although Stella had dressed it up in fancy words and promises, with hindsight, she could see it had been bribery, just as Hank said. I was a fool to believe them. I can see that now. I agreed for all the wrong reasons. Partly because I was flattered they thought I was a good painter, and because they said a widow like me should be grateful that Fraser was willing to marry me. Hank strode toward her and rested his hands lightly on her shoulders so he could look into her eyes. In the dim light of the barn, and with the flickering flames of the fire casting shadows on the planes of his face, Eleanor's pulse quickened. You don't need someone like Fraser and Stella Sanchez to sell your paintings, he said softly. You're talented in your own right, Eleanor. Of course, you're too modest to see that, but I was watching folks at the summer fair. Everyone was full of praise for your paintings. You've always been so kind to me, Eleanor said, looking down at the ground, feeling suddenly shy under his piercing blue-eyed gaze. Whoever starts writing to you from your mail-order bride advertisement will be a lucky woman, she added quietly. She felt a sudden pang of regret that it hadn't been Hank she had bumped into at Mrs. McKinnon's matrimonial bureau on that fateful day instead of Stella. Things could have turned out very differently. She sighed, pushing the thought away. Deep in her heart, she knew that she felt an irresistible tug of attraction to Hank Mitchell, but he had already explained that he was looking for love elsewhere. She had to put him out of her mind and stop hoping for something that could never come true. He shook his head and gave a low laugh, which was aimed at himself. I've stopped opening those letters, he said, much to my ma's disappointment. You have? Why? Eleanor's heart beat a little faster as his expression softened. I guess I lost interest in the thought of meeting a woman that way. This time, it was Hank's turn to glance away, as though he didn't want to meet her eyes. The thing is, my heart was already leading me somewhere else. The moment of hope that had flared in Eleanor's chest shriveled. He already loves someone else. The thought felt like a lead weight dragging her back down. In that case, you must follow your heart, she said quietly. She stepped away, under the pretext of putting more wood on the fire, so he wouldn't see the unexpected tears that had pooled in her eyes. What a fool I was to think he liked me. Hank returned to the entrance of the barn, staring into the raging storm outside again, and Eleanor glanced surreptitiously at him. He seemed to be grappling with not knowing what to say, and she wondered whether he was regretting the moment of intimacy between them. The wind and rain were starting to abate, and all too soon they would have to leave again. The thought made Eleanor feel sad, as though she had let something important slip from her grasp. My dress will be dry soon, she said. I guess I'll have to wait in Willow Brook until the road is passable again, but I'm very grateful for your help. You'd better get back home as well. Your family will be worried about you. Hank seemed to come to a decision as he pushed himself away from the door frame and approached her, his tall, rugged frame casting a shadow over her petite figure. Something's been on my mind, and if I don't say it now, I might never get the chance again. Hope flared in Eleanor's chest again. It sounds kind of important. She searched his face, but there were no clues. Are you all right, Eleanor? He asked, his voice low and steady. It wasn't what she'd expected. I am Hank, and I'm truly grateful that you saved my life today. He sighed and shifted his weight as though he needed to say more. I mean, are you all right with breaking off your engagement to Fraser Sanchez? Is it really what you want to do? Without hesitation, Eleanor nodded. I've never been more sure. Relief filled his eyes. Eleanor, there's something I need to tell you, he continued, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness. She tilted her head to look up at him, her curls falling over her shoulders now that her hair was dry again. What is it? Hank took his battered hat off and held it to his chest. Ever since I first saw you at the summer fair, when you were sketching my horses, I haven't been able to get you out of my mind, he said slowly, feeling his way through the words. Eleanor felt the blood rise to her cheeks and her eyes widened in surprise. You haven't? No, he replied, his bright blue eyes meeting hers once more. I told myself you were far too grand for a simple man like me. But when you rode up front on the stagecoach with me on that journey to Cottonwood Creek, it only made it worse. I wanted to know everything about you, but you were already promised to Fraser Sanchez. I've tried to forget, tried to push these feelings aside, but I can't. I just can't. Eleanor's heart raced, her thoughts a whirlwind. She had admired Hank from afar, but she never imagined that he felt the same way. What are you trying to say, Hank? He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the moment. I want to be with you, Eleanor. And if you agree, I'd like to get to know Isaac and Lily better as well. Hearing how Stella and Fraser have treated you so badly, I want to make sure it never happens again and that you have a safe and happy home for you and your children. He looked deep into her eyes. Some folks might think this is too soon, but I think I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor. If I don't tell you, I'll always regret it. I didn't dare say anything in case you went ahead and married Fraser, but now I can't hold it in any longer. Eleanor's breath hitched in her throat, and her heart raced as she absorbed his confession. I'm not sure what to say, Hank. He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. You don't need to say anything, Eleanor. Just know that my heart is yours, if you'll have it. I know it's too soon for you to make any decisions, and I don't want you to yet. She reached out and took his hat from him, placing it to one side before taking his hands in hers. I've always been drawn to you, Hank. Your strength, your kindness. I never thought I'd be lucky enough to meet someone like you after losing Jacob, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness in not rushing me. She gazed up, drinking in the sight of his chiseled jaw and the way his hair curled slightly on his collar. Can we get to know one another slowly? If this is to work between us, I want the children to see you as a proper pa, but their experience with Fraser hasn't been very pleasant for them. Of course, Hank replied. I'd never presume to replace your first husband in their eyes, but I've always wanted a family. I'd like a chance to show them that you mean the world to me, Eleanor. Maybe they can help me with the horses. I know I don't have everything worked out with getting my own land, but I won't let you down. I'll do whatever it takes to provide a home for you all and a place we can call our own. Eleanor's heart swelled with joy at Hank's heartfelt words, and she nodded slightly at the unasked question in his eyes. Hank lowered his head and gently brushed a tender kiss on her lips, never once taking his eyes from her. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat, and as the last of the lightning danced in the distance and the sun came out again, painting a rainbow over the barn, she knew that God had listened, and she had met the man she would spend the rest of her days with. Epilogue. Willow, Brook, Montana, 1 year later. The sun was high in the clear blue sky as Eleanor bustled out onto the veranda of the log cabin at Maple Tree Ranch to carry on with her latest painting. She had the easel set up outside, so she could make the most of the cooling breeze which whispered across the land. Plus, she had always preferred to paint outdoors when the weather was fine. She stood for a moment before starting, allowing herself a moment to take in the view, and sighed with contentment. The ranch looked very different now, a year on since the flood had swept through the land. Just beyond the barnyard, wildflowers nodded in the lush grassland, filling the air with a sweet fragrance that spoke of life and renewal. The leaves of the cottonwood trees rustled in the wind, and the gentle swaying of the tall prairie grasses reminded her of waves rippling on a lake. The vivid hues of the Montana landscape never failed to inspire her, and Eleanor smiled happily as she pondered her next few paintings. She had already decided she wanted to do one of the newly mended barn, with the cattle grazing beyond it, to hang in her bedroom. A sudden burst of laughter caught her attention. It was Isaac and Lily who were chasing butterflies through the garden, which she had spent many long hours creating. They were already enjoying a bountiful harvest of vegetables, and the fruit bushes would yield a few berries as well. They were only just getting established, but there would be more the following year. "Don't forget to collect the eggs," she called to the children. They nodded and ran toward the wooden chicken coop. Isaac and Lily had 20 chickens now and loved nothing more than scattering the corn for them every morning and afternoon, and then hunting in the straw for the freshly laid smooth brown eggs. Lately, they had even set up a stand at the end of the ranch track to sell their spare eggs, along with any vegetables she didn't need for her own cooking. It provided a few extra coins each week and taught the children the benefits of hard work. Just as Eleanor picked up her paintbrush to start painting, Poppy and Bluey both jumped up and started wagging their tails. A cloud of dust on the drive told her that someone was coming, and her heart lifted as she saw it was Hank. Prince loped along at a steady pace, with his colorful strawberry roan coat gleaming in the sun. He was a handsome animal, and there were already 2 more foals in the nearest field from the same bloodline which Hank had bred Prince from. "I didn't think you'd be back for a while," she said, as Hank jumped off Prince in front of the cabin. He took the bridle and saddle off, putting them on the fence rail, and Prince trotted away, eager to have a drink of water and a roll in the dust. "I've got good news." Hank bounded up the veranda steps and pulled Eleanor into an embrace, brushing a lock of her dark hair off her cheek. "Go on then, don't keep me in suspense." She stood on tiptoes and kissed him. "Morris's pa at the livery has agreed to buy my stagecoach off me. He offered a fair price, and I'm glad it's gone to him. He wants to take over my routes and give Morris the livery to run as his own business in a few years." "That's wonderful. I can't think of a nicer family to take over from you." "Me neither. I was determined the O'Hanlon brothers wouldn't get their hands on it," Hank grinned. "They don't operate much around here anymore anyway. Not since their passengers complained about their shoddy ways. And now you'll be able to put all your energy into this ranch and breeding more horses." Eleanor lingered in Hank's embrace, enjoying the feeling of his muscular chest beneath her hands. "Shall I clear my painting things away? I'm not sure what time everyone's arriving." "How's this picture going?" Hank looked at the colorful canvas on the easel, and his voice held a note of pride, which she always found gratifying. "A couple more hours, Pa, and it should be finished. Dorothy has told more of her friends in New York about me, and I have enough commissions to take me through to Christmas." Eleanor felt a surge of fondness and gratitude for Dorothy Wexford. Ever since she had purchased one of her paintings, the old woman had become a staunch advocate for nurturing her talent. A steady stream of Dorothy's well-to-do friends in New York were now clients as well, and it was thanks to the money from those sales that Eleanor and Hank had been able to purchase Maple Tree Ranch just after their wedding last fall. Now that some time had passed, Eleanor had even found it possible to think about Fraser Sanchez with fondness. After Stella's initial fury about the painting being destroyed in the flood, he had finally stood up to her, telling his sister that she should treat folks more kindly. He had admitted that coming to Montana had been a mistake, in the hopes of reviving his flagging love of painting, and there was no ill feeling when she'd haltingly told him that she couldn't continue with their engagement. They had left a few days later, and last she'd heard, they were considering settling in Italy instead. Hank tilted her chin so their lips could meet again, and a smile played on his mouth as he glanced down at the swell of her waistline between them. "You reckon our baby will be coming about Christmas time, so Dorothy will just have to wait if she wants any more paintings after that. Nothing is more important than our children, Eleanor." He glanced toward Isaac and Lily. "All of them," he added, with love in his voice. I've already written to her to tell her the good news that our family is growing. Eleanor leaned against Hank's chest. Her head fit perfectly against his shoulder, as though it was written in the stars that they were meant to be together. She had been worried for a while that she might feel guilty loving another man so much. But seeing how kind Hank was with Isaac and Lily showed her that the Lord had blessed her with two good men in her life, and that loving Hank with all her heart didn't detract from the love she had shared with Jacob before. "What are you thinking?" Hank asked softly. He rested his hand lightly on her waist as they gazed across the ranch, enjoying the idyllic summer's day. The cheerful melody of the meadowlarks over the grassland filled Eleanor's heart with joy, and she watched as an eagle soared gracefully on the thermals, its keen eyes surveying the vast expanse of the river plains. "I'm thinking how lucky I was to meet you," she murmured. "You always believed in me, and I thank the Lord every night for how he has blessed us with this ranch and how folks want to buy the horses that you've reared. This is what my heart yearned for when I left the safety of living with my sister. I just never imagined my prayers that you might notice me would be answered." "I reckon God kept making our paths cross for a reason," Hank chuckled. "Speaking of your sister, is that 2 wagons I see coming up our track?" Isaac and Lily ran toward them, just as Hank finished speaking. "Ma, Pa, Aunt Imogen and Uncle Jeff are already here, and Fiona and Abraham are right behind them. Can we help unhitch their wagons?" Eleanor was suddenly galvanized into action. "Of course, show them in," she called happily. "I've already prepared everything for the picnic. Jeff and Abraham can help me set up the table by the willow trees on the riverbank. It will be nice and cool for us all," Hank said. Before Eleanor could hurry away to welcome their guests, Hank pulled her close again. "You make me the happiest man in all of Montana, and I truly love you," he murmured against her sweet-smelling hair. "I love you too," Eleanor whispered back. There was a flurry of activity for the next few minutes as everyone got down from the 2 wagons. Imogen was carrying her new daughter. "This is my new little sister," Jesse informed them all, grinning up at them from under his mop of curls. Abraham had baked enough pies and cakes to last a week, and Fiona watched on fondly as their adopted children, Freddie and Gloria, helped Hank and Jeff set up the table, chattering loudly about how they had helped their pa bake the cakes in Betty's Bakehouse, the family business. "Can you believe how much things have changed since we left Pittsburgh?" Eleanor commented as Imogen and Fiona smiled and congratulated her when they spotted the unmistakable hint of new life under the swell of her waist. "We left our old lives behind as 3 widows, and now all have wonderful husbands again, and our families are growing in ways we could never have imagined. And it's all thanks to me answering that advertisement in the Matrimonial Times," Imogen said with a wry smile. "Along with a few unexpected adventures along the way," Fiona chuckled. "Outlaws, floods, a kidnapping. I thought you told us Willowbrook was a sleepy little town, Imogen?" The 3 women linked arms and strolled through the grass, each of them feeling that they were very fortunate to have one another. Their journey west had brought them all a second chance at love and deepened the bonds of their friendship in a very special way. "Aren't we lucky?" Hank said as he helped Eleanor sit at the table. "We are," Eleanor replied with a heartfelt smile. "Here's to family, friends, and second chances," Hank added. The children came to sit at the table, and everyone lowered their heads to give thanks to the Lord for the food they were about to share. As Hank ended the prayer, Eleanor's heart swelled with gratitude for the life they had built on this frontier ranch. She thought of the rugged determination and courage it had taken for all of them to carve out their new beginnings in the wild, untamed land. The bonds they had forged, the shared laughter and tears, and the joy of raising their families in a close-knit community were priceless treasures that Eleanor would always cherish. The sun bathed the land in a golden glow, and she knew there was nowhere she would rather be than building a new life with Hank by her side. A breeze whispered across the land, and the horses contentedly grazed nearby as Eleanor and Hank shared a secret smile, their eyes full of love for each other. The Lord had blessed her with so much, and soon they would welcome a new baby into their family as well. She reached across the table and Hank squeezed her hand as the conversation rose and fell around the table. Hank and Eleanor knew that no matter what challenges life might bring, their love would be the bond that held them steady. Like the wild roses that scrambled through the apple trees in their garden, their roots entwined as one. She and Hank would never be parted from each other or this land they had come to call home. The end. Thank you for listening to this free audiobook, and we hope you enjoyed it. Martha Gillcrest writes clean romance stories that sweep you away to when times were simpler, with plenty of love and adventure to entertain you. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like it with a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. That way, you will always know when a new audiobook has been added for your listening pleasure.